Who did this to you?" Luciano Vieri didn't ask twice. He grabbed the edge of the sink, his knuckles white, staring at the trembling maid who couldn't stop crying. The bruise crawling up her arm told him everything. Her silence refused to. If you've ever had to hide your pain to protect someone you love, this story was made for you. Subscribe to our channel and follow Elena's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The clock on the wall of Luciano Vieri's private office read 2:17 in the morning when he heard it. Not a sound most men would have noticed. Not a crash. Not a scream. Not the kind of noise that demanded attention the way a gunshot did, or the way a phone ringing at midnight did. It was smaller than that. Quieter. A sound so controlled, so deliberately contained, that it almost wasn't a sound at all. It was the sound of someone crying who had spent years learning not to be heard. Luciano had been awake because sleep was something that had never come easily to him. Not in the 32 years since his father first put a gun in his hand and told him the world would only respect what it feared. He had been sitting at his desk, reviewing numbers that didn't need reviewing, going over territory reports that his lieutenants had already confirmed twice, doing the things that men like him did, when the silence of a large empty house pressed in too close, and the thoughts inside their own heads became the most dangerous company in the room. He heard the sound, and he stopped. He sat very still for a moment, the way he did when someone said something unexpected in a meeting, and he needed a half second to decide how to respond. Then he stood up and walked toward it. The Blackwood estate had 41 rooms. Luciano had counted them once years ago, when he first acquired the property through a series of transactions that his lawyers had described as complex and that his enemies had described as theft. He knew every corridor, he knew every door and what was behind it, and which floors creaked and which didn't. He knew his home the way a man knows a weapon he's carried for years, not through affection, but through relentless familiarity. The sound was coming from the old servant kitchen on the east side of the ground floor. Nobody used that kitchen anymore. The main kitchen was on the west side, modern and stainless and efficiently managed by a staff of 4 who arrived at 6 in the morning and left by 9 in the evening. The old servant kitchen was a relic. Stone floors, heavy wooden counters, a deep sink that was original to the house. It was where the cleaning staff sometimes took their breaks because it was far from every room Luciano used, and because there was an old coffee maker in the corner that nobody had bothered to remove. Luciano walked through the corridor with his hands loose at his sides and the particular kind of attention he had developed over 41 years of living in a world where the difference between a threat and a harmless situation was sometimes only a few seconds of careful observation. He pushed open the door. Elena Marlowe was standing at the sink. He had seen her before, of course. She had been working at the estate for almost 11 months. She was one of 14 household staff members whose names appeared on a roster that his head of security reviewed monthly. He had seen her in corridors. He had noticed her the way he noticed all his employees, not as individuals, but as components of a system that kept his home functioning the way it was supposed to function. She was 26 years old. She was small, maybe 5 feet and 3 inches, with dark hair pulled back the way it always was when she was working, and the plain gray uniform the cleaning staff wore, and hands that were always moving, always carrying something, or wiping something, or adjusting something. She was the kind of person who moved through spaces without drawing attention, which in Luciano's world was either a skill or a survival mechanism, and he had never thought hard enough about Elena Marlowe to determine which one it was for her, until now. Because now she was standing at the sink with water running over her hands, and her shoulders shaking with the particular rhythm of someone fighting very hard to cry quietly, and her uniform sleeve had ridden up to reveal something that made Luciano's entire body go still in a way that had nothing to do with caution and everything to do with the specific cold fury that certain things still managed to produce in him even after all these years. A bruise, dark purple edged with yellow, not fresh, 2, maybe 3 days old. The shape of it was wrong for an accident, too deliberate, too contained. Somebody had grabbed her, hard, for a long time. Luciano stood in the doorway and said nothing for a moment. He watched her. He watched the way she kept her face turned toward the sink and her breath coming in those controlled, almost silent intervals. And he understood something that most men in his position would never have understood, because most men in his position had spent so long surrounded by performed emotion, people crying because they wanted something from him, people showing fear because they calculated it was safer, that they had lost the ability to recognize the real thing. Elena wasn't performing anything. She didn't know he was there. "Who did this to you?" His voice was quiet, steady, the same tone he used when he already knew the answer and was giving someone the chance to be honest before he stopped giving chances. Elena spun around. The sound she made was not a scream. It was something worse, the sharp, bitten-off gasp of someone who had been startled out of a moment they thought was private. And the shame of being caught that way hit her face immediately and completely, and Luciano watched it happen and felt something move in his chest that he didn't immediately have a name for. She grabbed her sleeve and pulled it down. "Mr. Vieri?" Her voice was almost steady. Almost. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were... I'll finish up and be out of your way immediately. That's not what I asked you. I apologize for the noise, sir. It won't happen again." "Stop apologizing." He said it without heat. "I asked you a question." She looked at him then. Really looked at him the way people rarely did, because looking directly at Luciano Vieri for any length of time required a degree of composure that most people couldn't sustain. Her eyes were red. Her jaw was set in a way that told him she was actively holding herself together through will alone. "No one hurt me, sir." Luciano said nothing. He was very good at silence. He had learned a long time ago that silence was a more effective tool than almost anything else, because people in the absence of a response always rushed to fill the space, and in rushing, they revealed things they had intended to keep hidden. He waited. Elena held his gaze for 4 seconds. He counted. Then she looked away. "You should go back to bed, Mr. Vieri. I'll be finished here in a few minutes." "You're lying." She said nothing. "That's fine," Luciano said. He moved into the room properly and sat down at the old wooden table near the window, and the deliberateness of it, the clear signal that he wasn't going anywhere, made her entire posture shift. "Lie if you need to, but you're going to stay where you are and not pretend this conversation didn't happen." "Mr. Vieri? How long have you worked here?" The shift in direction surprised her. He saw it. "Almost 11 months, she said. "And in 11 months, has anyone in this house given you reason to think you can't come to me with a problem?" She was very quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "I don't have a problem. You have a bruise on your arm that's 4 inches wide. I fell. You fell onto someone's hand." The words landed, and she didn't respond to them. She turned back toward the sink and reached for a dish that didn't need washing, and began washing it anyway, and Luciano watched her and understood something with a clarity that surprised him. She wasn't just afraid. She was protecting something. People who were simply afraid behaved one way. They deflected, they placated, they gave you just enough to make you comfortable and then backed toward the door. Elena wasn't doing any of that. Elena was building a wall, methodically, deliberately, the way someone did when they had decided that whatever was on the other side of that wall was more important than anything else. That was different. "The dish is already clean," Luciano said. Elena stopped washing it. "Sit down." She didn't move. "Elena." He said her name for the first time, and the effect of it was immediate and visible. Her shoulders came up slightly, like someone who had just been reminded that they were known, that they were seen, and that being seen when you had spent years trying to be invisible was a strange and complicated feeling. She turned around. She didn't sit, but she faced him properly. "There's no one to report," she said. "I handled the situation." "What situation?" She said nothing. "You handled it yourself." He looked at the bruise which was still visible at the edge of her sleeve. "That's what you tell yourself." "I don't need..." "Who's Marco?" The silence that fell was different from every silence before it. Elena Marlowe went completely still. Not the stillness of a frightened person. The stillness of someone who has just heard the word that they have spent a very long time hoping nobody would ever say to them. What? The word came out almost without sound. Marco, Luciano said. There's a name on your emergency contact form. Marco Marlowe, listed as your brother. Yes, he's my brother. She was working to keep her voice even. What does that have to do with anything? How old is he? Mr. Vieri, I don't understand why. How old is he? A pause. Then, 8. Where is he living? Another pause. Longer. I'm not comfortable discussing my personal. Where is he living, Elena? She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her calculate, watched her weigh things against each other in real time, and he recognized the process because it was the same process he went through every time he had to make a decision where every available option carried a cost. With a neighbor, she said finally. Mrs. Carver. She watches him when I'm working. Where? Mr. Vieri. I'm not asking to cause you difficulty. I'm asking because I want to understand what I'm looking at. You're not looking at anything. You're my employer. I apologize for crying in your house, and I promise it won't happen again, and I'd really like to go home now, if... Sit down. The tone was different now. Not louder, not threatening, just absolute. The tone of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that certain things couldn't be asked, they could only be stated. Elena sat down. She sat across from him at the old wooden table and folded her hands in front of her on the surface and kept her posture straight, and Luciano could see her doing it, assembling herself, layering composure over whatever was underneath, because whatever was underneath was too important to let out in front of a man she didn't trust. He respected that, actually. He didn't say so. Tell me about the bruise. I already told you. I fell. Tell me about the bruise. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were steady. There's a man, she said. He lives near where Marco stays. He has a problem with the fact that I won't let him inside when I come to pick Marco up. He's been difficult about it. Difficult? He grabbed my arm. I got away. It's been handled. How has it been handled? I told Mrs. Carver. She's going to... It hasn't been handled, Luciano said. You're crying in my kitchen at 2 a.m. It hasn't been handled. Elena's jaw tightened. I don't need your help. That's not a requirement. Tell me his name. I'm not going to... His name, Elena. This isn't... She stopped herself, took a breath. His name is Derek Powell. He lives in apartment 4C at 1182 Callaway Street. He's been bothering me for about 6 weeks. Is he the only problem? She hesitated. That hesitation was the most informative thing she had done since he walked into the room. There are other problems, Luciano said. It wasn't a question. She looked at her hands. Marco is sick, she said. He's been sick for about 8 months. There's a specialist, a pediatric cardiologist at Boston Children's, who says he can help, but the waiting list is... She stopped, started again. The cost of the consultations alone is more than I make in 4 months. And there's a procedure, if it's necessary. And it probably will be necessary according to the cardiologist. And the cost of that... She stopped again. Luciano waited. I can handle it, she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. I'm handling it. By yourself. Yes, by myself. While also dealing with a man who grabs you in parking lots. I can handle, while also working 60 hours a week in this house. I said I can. You're crying at 2:17 in the morning in the servant kitchen because you're trying to handle everything at once and everything is becoming too heavy. Luciano said it simply, without judgment, without softening. That's not a flaw. That's a situation. Elena stared at him. He watched something move behind her eyes. Something that had the quality of a woman who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just heard someone acknowledge the weight of it for the first time and who didn't know what to do with that acknowledgement because nobody had offered her one before. She didn't cry again. She was too composed for that now. But something in her face shifted some small architecture of protection, and Luciano filed it away. "What's wrong with his heart?" he asked. "It's a congenital defect. He was born with it. Our father knew about it, but he died before Marco was diagnosed properly." Her voice was careful, clinical, the voice of someone who had learned to describe catastrophe in manageable pieces. "The defect affects the way blood moves through the left ventricle. In some children, it resolves on its own. In Marco's case, it hasn't resolved." "Who was the cardiologist?" "Dr. Nathan Reeves." "Why are you asking me all?" "How long has Marco been with this Mrs. Carver?" 3 years, since I started working. She's kind. She takes good care of him. But she's 71 and she can't manage if Marco has an episode." Elena's voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. "He had one last month. She had to call 911 because she couldn't carry him to the car. I got to the hospital 2 hours later because I was on the west side when she called, and the bus—" She stopped. Luciano said nothing. He was watching her face and understanding things. "The bus," he said. "Yes." "You take the bus." "I don't own a car." "How long is the commute?" 40 minutes each way on a good day. An hour and 20 if there are delays." She looked at him with a kind of guarded directness that he was beginning to recognize as her natural mode. "I'm not telling you this so that you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you asked, and I've decided it would be more exhausting to keep deflecting than to just answer." Luciano almost smiled. He didn't. "Your father worked in Boston," he said. Another one of those pauses, the particular kind that meant he'd said something that landed somewhere unexpected. "He did?" Elena said. "Why, what did he do?" He worked in private security for a number of years." "For whom?" The pause this time was longer than all the others. "Mr. Vieri," Elena said carefully. "I don't see how my father's employment history is relevant to what did he do in private security." The way she looked at him now was different from any way she had looked at him before. It was the look of a woman who had just understood something and was very rapidly trying to determine what that understanding meant and what its consequences were. "He worked protection," she said. "Personal protection. For clients who required discretion. Names? I don't remember." She was lying again. He could hear it, the same controlled quality as before, the same careful construction, except this time the subject matter was different. This lie wasn't about protecting herself. This lie was something else entirely. "Your father worked for Carmine Vieri," Luciano said. The room went so completely quiet that the faint sound of traffic from 3 blocks away was audible. Elena didn't move. "For approximately 6 years," Luciano continued. "From 2001 to 2007. His name was Robert Marlowe. He was one of the most trusted men in my father's organization." She stopped. "How do you know that?" "Because when you appeared on my staff roster 11 months ago, something about your name was familiar and I looked into it. You investigated me. I investigate everyone, and you kept me on staff." There was something in her voice now. Not quite anger, something more complicated. "You knew who my father was and you kept me on staff and you've said nothing for 11 months. I was watching. The word came out tight. You were watching me. I wanted to understand why you were here. I'm here because I needed a job." "You needed a job," Luciano said. "So you applied to work in the house of the man whose family your father served for 6 years. It wasn't—" She stopped. "It wasn't a coincidence," Luciano said. "I've known that for 11 months. What I haven't known is what you wanted." Elena looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was cold. The clock on the wall read 2:41. Outside, something moved in the wind, a branch against a window somewhere, and the sound was the only thing that punctuated the silence between them. "My father died 4 years ago," Elena said finally. "He left almost nothing. Debt mostly. Some old boxes, some photographs, and some documents." She looked at her hands. I didn't understand what the documents were at first. I thought they were old contracts, financial records from his work. But one of them had a name I recognized because I'd seen it in a news article a few years before. Whose name? She looked up at him. Dante Vieri, she said. Your brother. Luciano sat very still. The document was a financial transfer record, Elena said. Her voice was perfectly level now. She had crossed some threshold in herself, and what was on the other side of it was a particular kind of calm. Money moved from an account registered under a shell company your organization controlled into an account belonging to a man named Victor Salvatore. The name landed in Luciano's chest like something physical. Victor. The transfer was dated 8 years ago, Elena said. 2 months before Dante disappeared. She paused. My father's notes in the margins said the money was payment for information. Information about Dante's location. Information about his plans to leave the organization and start something independently. She stopped. He didn't know what the information was being used for, not at first. He found out later. And by then he couldn't say anything, Luciano said. No. Her voice was quieter now. He couldn't say anything. He was afraid. He had Marco to think about. Marco was only a few months old when all this happened. She looked at Luciano steadily. He was afraid of what would happen to his family if he spoke up. So he kept the documents. And he died keeping them. And he left them to me, and I didn't know what to do with them for 2 years. Until you came to work for me, I needed to understand what I was holding, she said. I needed to understand whether it was dangerous, whether the person it implicated, whether Victor Salvatore was still, whether it still mattered. She paused. And I needed money. Both things were true. I'm not going to pretend the money didn't matter. Where are the documents now? She held his gaze. Safe, she said. Luciano studied her. In 41 years, he had sat across from hundreds of people who were dangerous, and hundreds of people who were frightened, and dozens who were both. Elena Marlowe was not dangerous in the way his world defined dangerous. She didn't have power or weapons or connections. What she had was information. And she had been carrying it alone for 2 years, while also raising her sick brother on the salary of a maid, and taking the bus 40 minutes each way, and crying in kitchens at 2:17 in the morning, because she didn't know how to put the weight down. He felt something that wasn't pity. Pity was a soft emotion, and Luciano Vieri did not do soft. What he felt was something closer to the feeling he got when he had been looking for something for a long time, and found it somewhere he hadn't thought to look. You should have come to me, he said. I didn't know if I could trust you. You still don't know. No, she agreed. I don't. But you're telling me anyway. You saw the bruise, Elena said simply. You could have walked away. You didn't. Luciano said nothing. And I'm tired, she said. I have been tired for a very long time. And the documents have been sitting in a fireproof box under my bed for 2 years. And I have thought about burning them, and I have thought about sending them to a newspaper, and I have thought about showing up at a police station, and none of those options felt right, because I didn't know who to trust, and I still don't, but... She stopped. But my brother is sick, and his heart is not getting better, and I need help, and I don't have any other options. The last sentence came out stripped of everything. No composure, no wall, just the flat truth of a situation. Luciano stood up. He walked to the window and stood there for a moment, looking at the dark grounds of the estate, at the iron gates and the garden, and the path that led down to the road. He stood there long enough that Elena probably thought he wasn't going to say anything. Then he turned around. Victor Salvatore, he said, has worked for me for 15 years. I know. He's still inside my organization. I know that too. If what you're describing is accurate... He stopped. If the documents say what you're telling me they say, then a man I have trusted for 15 years orchestrated the disappearance of my brother and has been inside my organization ever since. Elena said nothing. Do you understand what it means that I'm hearing this from you? Yes, she said quietly. It means I'm the only person who knows, and that makes me either very valuable or very dangerous, depending on what you decide to do about it. Luciano looked at her. Are you afraid right now? She thought about it, really thought about it visibly, which most people didn't do when asked that question. Yes, she said. What are you afraid of? That you'll decide I know too much. And that Marco will lose the only person he has left. Luciano nodded slowly. He had made decisions in worse conditions than this. He had made decisions with less information and higher stakes and under more immediate threat. He was good at decisions. It was in many ways the only thing he had ever been completely sure he was good at. He made one now. You're not going home tonight, he said. You're going to stay in one of the guest rooms. Tomorrow, I'm going to send someone to bring Marco here. He's going to stay here until this is resolved. Elena stared at him. Mr. Vieri. Mrs. Carver can come if it would help your brother to have a familiar face. I can't just... The man who grabbed you knows where you live. He knows you have a brother. If Salvatore has been watching you. Luciano stopped. You've been sitting on documents that implicate him for 2 years. If he knows that, and I have to assume he might, then the man who grabbed your arm and the man who has been inside my organization for 15 years may not be two separate problems. The color left Elena's face. She stopped. I didn't think about that. I know. Do you think he knows? I think, Luciano said carefully, that Victor Salvatore has survived 15 years inside my organization by knowing things before other people think to know them. And I think that a woman who shows up to work at my house 11 months ago with the last name of a man who used to keep my organization's secrets is exactly the kind of thing Victor would notice. Elena was very quiet. You should have come to me sooner, he said again, not unkindly, just as a statement of fact. I know, she said. I know that now. The old clock on the kitchen wall read 2:58 in the morning. The estate was still quiet around them. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and the iron gates stood dark against the darker sky. And inside the old servant kitchen, the Mafia boss of Boston's underground empire and the maid, who had been quietly cleaning his floors for 11 months, sat across a wooden table from each other, with the weight of a secret between them that was about to pull the entire world they both occupied apart at its seams. The documents, Luciano said. Everything your father left you. I need to see it. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, If I show you and you decide it's not what I think it is, if it turns out to be nothing, or old paperwork that doesn't mean what my father thought it meant, I need your word that Marco's situation doesn't change, that you won't use what I've told you tonight against me. I don't use sick children, Luciano said. His voice was flat. Not against anyone. She studied him. I need your word, she said again. You have it. Another moment of silence, of assessment, of a woman who had survived 2 years of carrying something terrible alone, making a decision about whether to trust the most dangerous man in the room. Then she said, The fireproof box is under my bed. I'll need to go and get it. Tomorrow morning, Luciano said, with security. Tonight you stay here. Elena nodded once. Then she said something that he didn't expect. My father believed in your family, she said. He talked about Carmine Vieri with respect, not fear, actual respect, which was rare from my father. He didn't give that to many people. She looked at Luciano steadily. He also believed that what happened to Dante was wrong. He carried that. I think he was still carrying it when he died. Luciano said nothing. I just thought you should know that, Elena said. Before we do whatever comes next. He stood up from the table. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. There's a guest suite on the 3rd floor, he said. Second door on the right. The housekeeper has the key. Mr. Vieri. He turned. Thank you, Elena said, for not walking away. Luciano looked at her for a moment. The woman who had been invisible in his house for 11 months. The woman who cleaned his floors and pulled down her sleeve and cried without making noise, and had been carrying underneath all of that a secret that was about to change everything. "Don't thank me yet," he said. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped, didn't turn around. "Marco," he said, "what does he like for breakfast?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Waffles," she said. "He likes waffles with strawberries." Luciano nodded once to no one in particular and walked out of the kitchen and back toward his office. There was a phone call he needed to make, and the name he was going to say into the phone, the name he had trusted for 15 years, the name that had sat at his right hand through wars and losses and decisions that had cost him more than he'd ever admit. That name now sat in his chest like a piece of glass. Victor Salvatore. He had been inside the organization while Dante was gone. He had been there through every single year of searching. He had sat across from Luciano at dinner tables, and in planning sessions, and in the aftermath of emergencies, and he had looked Luciano in the eye and said nothing. Luciano reached his office and sat down at his desk and placed both hands flat on the surface and breathed. The clock read 3:04 in the morning. Everything he had built for the last 8 years had been built on a foundation with a crack in it. And the person who found the crack was a 26-year-old woman in a gray uniform who took the bus 40 minutes each way and cried without making noise and had decided tonight that she had been tired long enough to let someone in. He picked up the phone. He had work to do. Luciano made 3 phone calls between 3:04 and 3:47 in the morning. The first was to Ren Caruso, his head of security, a man who had worked for him for 9 years and who answered on the second ring without a single note of sleep in his voice, because Ren Caruso had long ago made the decision that his hours were whatever Luciano's hours were. "I need you at the estate by 5, Luciano said. "Bring 2 men you trust completely, nobody else." "Understood. Do I need to know why?" "Not yet." "Do I need to be armed?" Luciano thought about Victor Salvatore. About 15 years of breakfasts and strategy sessions and handshakes. About the shape of a betrayal so long and patient it had almost become invisible. "Yes," he said. The second call was to a private doctor named Victoria Hayes, who served as the estate's medical consultant and who was one of perhaps 7 people in the city of Boston that Luciano trusted with something as fragile as the truth. "I have a patient I need you to evaluate," he said. 8 years old, pediatric cardiac issue. The cardiologist is Nathan Reeves at Boston Children's. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You're calling me at 3 in the morning about a child?" "Yes." "Is it an emergency?" "Not tonight. But I want you to have his records by 8 in the morning and I want your opinion by noon." "Luciano," her voice was careful. "Whose child is this?" "Someone who works for me." "That doesn't answer my question." "It answers enough of it. Can you do it?" A pause. Then, "I'll need authorization to access the records." "I'll have it arranged." He didn't explain further. Victoria didn't push. It was one of the reasons he trusted her. The third call was the one that cost him something. He sat at his desk for 4 full minutes before making it. He sat and looked at the name in his phone, a name he had called hundreds of times, a contact that had been in his phone so long that the number was attached to no memory of entering it, because it had simply always been there, the way certain things were, simply always there, the way foundations were there, the way gravity was there, until the moment they weren't. He called Danny Park his intelligence coordinator, a 29-year-old with a degree in computer science and an instinct for patterns that Luciano had recognized and recruited 5 years ago. Danny was careful and thorough, and more importantly, he reported directly to Luciano and to nobody else. "I need a full financial trace," Luciano said when Danny answered. "Shell companies connected to our accounts from 2015 to 2017, specifically any transfers routed through external parties." "That's a wide range." "I know." "Am I looking for something in particular?" "A transfer to an account belonging to Victor Salvatore." A pause. The particular quality of a silence from someone who understood immediately that they had just stepped into something significant and was choosing their next words accordingly. "Victor," Danny said. "Yes." "Does Victor know I'm looking?" "Nobody knows you're looking. Nobody knows this conversation happened. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Danny said quietly, "I'll have something for you by morning." Luciano hung up. He sat in his office for another 20 minutes, not reviewing reports, not making plans. Just sitting. Which was something he almost never did. There was a version of him that would have described stillness as a waste of time, would have classified the act of sitting without a purpose as something that weaker men did when they didn't know what to do. He had spent a long time believing that the difference between powerful men and ordinary ones was that powerful men always knew what to do. He was beginning to understand that this had never been true. He'd just been lucky enough that his mistakes had always been recoverable. This one might not be. Elena didn't sleep. She lay in the guest room on the 3rd floor. A room that was larger than the entire apartment she shared with Marco on Calloway Street, with sheets that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and curtains that blocked the city light completely. And she stared at the ceiling and replayed the conversation in the kitchen and tried to assess with the clear-eyed practicality that 2 years of doing everything alone had given her exactly how badly she might have miscalculated. She had told him. She had sat across from Luciano Vieri, the most feared man in the underground world of Boston, and she had told him his most trusted lieutenant had betrayed him. She had given him Victor Salvatore's name, and she had described the documents her father left her, and she had essentially placed herself in the middle of something that had gotten people killed before she was born. She thought about Marco. His face in the morning when he woke up and reached for the stuffed dog he'd had since he was 3. The one with the ripped ear that she had sewn back twice, and that he called Captain because of something he'd seen on a TV show. His laugh, which was enormous and sudden, and seemed too big for his small body. The way he grabbed her hand, crossing streets even though he was 8, and insisted he was old enough not to. If she had miscalculated tonight, Marco lost the only person he had. But if she had kept the documents under her bed for another year or 5 years or 10, if she had kept saying, "I can handle it," while the medical bills compounded and the interest on her father's debts didn't stop and Marco's heart didn't get better, then the result was the same, just slower and quieter, and with nobody to blame but her own stubbornness. She had made a choice. She had looked at Luciano Vieri across a table at 2:41 in the morning, and she had made a decision based on almost nothing on the fact that he hadn't walked away. On the fact that he'd asked about Marco's breakfast on something in his face when she said her father had believed in his family, that she couldn't have named, but that had felt however irrationally like something real. She might have been wrong. She wouldn't know until morning. She closed her eyes and didn't sleep and waited for it to come. At 6 in the morning, Ren Caruso arrived with 2 men named Paul and Tomas, both of whom Elena had seen around the estate, and neither of whom gave any indication of finding anything unusual about being called to a security meeting before dawn on a Tuesday. Luciano convened them in his private study, which was a room that most people who worked in the mansion had never entered. Elena had cleaned it twice methodically while Luciano was traveling. She knew the layout better than most. She was not invited to this meeting. She knew she wouldn't be, and she didn't expect to be, and she spent the hour it lasted. Sitting in the kitchen, the new kitchen this time. The main one with the stainless counters, drinking the coffee that one of the regular kitchen staff had made, and watching the clock, and trying not to project outcomes she couldn't control. At 7:12, one of Ren's men, Paul, the taller of the two, appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Ms. Marlowe," he said, "Mr. Vieri would like to see you." She followed him down the east corridor and into the study, and Luciano was standing at his desk when she came in with Ren Caruso, seated to one side, and a laptop open on the desk surface that was showing something she couldn't see from where she stood. "Close the door," Luciano said. Paul closed it from the outside. "Sit down," Luciano said to Elena. She sat in the chair across from the desk. Luciano studied her for a moment in the morning light, and she had the distinct impression, not for the first time, that he was doing more than looking at her. He was reading her the way other people read documents, looking for inconsistencies, looking for the places where what she showed didn't match what she felt. "Last night you told me the financial transfer record was dated 8 years ago," he said. "Yes." 2 months before Dante disappeared. "Yes. My intelligence coordinator ran a preliminary trace this morning." Luciano turned the laptop and pushed it toward her. He found a transfer. 8 years ago, October. A sum of $40,000 moved through a shell company we operated out of Delaware into an account registered to a holding company called LV Consulting Partners. Elena looked at the screen. "I don't know that name," she said. "You wouldn't. It's a shell inside a shell. It took Danny 3 hours to trace." Luciano paused. LV Consulting Partners is registered to a man named Leonard Vitale, a lawyer who has been Victor Salvatore's personal attorney for the last 12 years. The room was very quiet. "That's not a smoking gun," Ren said from the side of the room. He had the tone of a man who was doing his job, which was to not let the evidence run ahead of the facts. "It establishes a connection. It doesn't establish intent." "The documents my father kept will," Elena said. Both men looked at her. "What exactly do these documents consist of?" Ren asked. His voice was professional, not unfriendly, but the voice of someone assessing an asset. "A financial transfer record, my father's handwritten notes, and a letter." Elena paused. "The letter is the most significant piece. It was written by my father 2 years before he died. He addressed it to Luciano, actually." She looked at Luciano when she said this. "He wrote it, and then he couldn't send it. He kept saying he'd send it when things were safer. He died before things were ever safe enough." Luciano's face didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "Your father wrote me a letter," he said. "Yes." "And you've read it?" "Yes." "What does it say?" Elena was quiet for a moment. She had read the letter so many times in 2 years that she could have recited it from memory, standing up without pausing. She had read it in the dark, and in the early morning, and on the bus, and in the hospital waiting room during Marco's last episode. She knew every sentence of it. The weight of it had become so familiar that she sometimes forgot she was carrying it. "It says," she began carefully, "that Victor Salvatore came to my father in the fall of 8 years ago and told him that Dante Vieri was planning to leave the organization and establish a competing network on the south side of the city. He told my father this was a threat to the organization's stability and that certain information about Dante's location and schedule would need to be shared with external parties to protect the Vieri interests." She paused. "My father believed him," she said. "He provided the schedule information. He didn't know what it would be used for. He thought it was internal that Luciano was going to confront Dante, bring him back in." She stopped. 3 days after he gave Victor the information, Dante disappeared. No confrontation, no conversation, just gone. And my father understood then what he had helped with. And Victor came to him afterward and told him that what had happened was for the good of the organization, and that my father's continued silence was now part of his continued employment. She said the last part quietly. Ren was very still on the side of the room. Luciano hadn't moved. "Your father," Luciano said, and his voice was completely flat in a way that Elena had learned to recognize as not absence of feeling, but compression of it, was used to facilitate the removal of my brother from his own family. "Yes." And then he was silenced. "Yes." "For years." "Yes." While Victor Salvatore sat at my table. The sentence didn't rise at the end. It wasn't a question. It was something you said when you were laying facts out in a row and each one was heavier than the last. "My father was not a brave man at the end," Elena said. "I've had to live with that. I've had to decide what I thought of him and what I thought of his choices. And it isn't simple, and I don't expect it to be simple." She looked at Luciano steadily. "But he documented everything. He kept every piece of paper because I think part of him believed that someday someone would use it, that the truth would matter to someone. It matters, Luciano said. The two words were straightforward. No performance, no drama. They landed differently because of that. I need to see the documents today, Luciano said. He looked at Ren. I need a car and 2 people to accompany Ms. Marlowe to her apartment. Nobody is to know where she's going or why. Victor has standing access to the security roster, Ren said. The sentence dropped into the room and didn't need explanation. Then we don't use the security roster, Luciano said. Paul and Tomas aren't on it. They report to you, not to the organization's general ledger. We use them. Ren nodded once. What about Marco? Elena asked. You said he'd be brought here. I meant it. Give me the address and Mrs. Carver's number. I'll have someone bring them both this morning. She won't come with strangers. She'll be frightened. Then call her, Luciano said. He pushed his phone across the desk. Call her now and tell her to expect visitors. Tell her it's a job offer for the next several weeks. Tell her whatever you need to tell her. Elena picked up the phone. She called Mrs. Carver, who answered on the 3rd ring, sounding exactly the way she always did, at 7 in the morning, alert, in the particular way of elderly women who had never stopped being mothers even when the children were gone, suspicious of anything that deviated from schedule and fundamentally practical in a way that cut through confusion. Elena, what's happening? It's barely past 7. I know, Mrs. Carver. Everything is fine. Marco is okay. But I need you to listen carefully and not ask me too many questions right now. A pause. All right. Someone is going to come to your door this morning. 2 men. They work for a man I trust. She said the last 4 words and felt Ren Caruso look at her sharply, because nobody in this room had established that she trusted Luciano, and yet the words had come out naturally and without performance, and were she realized as she said them actually true. They're going to bring you and Marco somewhere safe for a few weeks. It's not an emergency, but it is important. Is someone after you? Mrs. Carver asked. I think there might be people paying attention to me that I'd rather not have paying attention to Marco. That's a yes, Mrs. Carver said, the way women who had lived long enough to hear every possible evasion said it. All right, I'll have his bag packed in 30 minutes. Does he need his school things? Yes, pack for a few weeks to be safe. Elena. Her voice lowered. Are you all right? Elena felt something move in her throat. The question was so simple and so direct, and Mrs. Carver asked it the way you asked it, when you already knew the answer might not be good, and you were asking anyway, because you needed to hear the person say it themselves. I'm working on it, Elena said. That's not yes. No, Elena admitted. But it's honest. A brief, warm silence. All right, 30 minutes. Tell your men to knock twice. Elena hung up and slid the phone back across the desk. She'll have them ready in 30 minutes, she said. Luciano nodded. He looked at Ren, and something passed between them that didn't require words, the compressed communication of 2 people who had worked together long enough that certain decisions could be conveyed in a look. I'll go myself, Ren said, standing. Take Paul, Luciano said. Tomas stays here. After Ren left the room, the quiet that settled between Luciano and Elena was different from the quiet in the kitchen the night before. That quiet had been the quiet of strangers in an unexpected situation. This quiet was something else, the quiet of people who had exchanged too much to pretend they were still strangers, but who hadn't yet figured out what they were instead. You should eat something, Luciano said. You haven't slept. Neither have you. I don't sleep much. I've noticed, Elena said, and then looked faintly surprised at herself for saying it, because it was the kind of thing you said when you'd been paying attention to someone, and she hadn't intended to reveal that she had been. Luciano looked at her, not with surprise, with the particular attention of a man who noticed things and filed them. How have you noticed? The kitchen lights on the east side come on sometimes after 2, Elena said carefully. When I've come in early for shift, I thought it was a timer issue for the first few months. Then I realized the timing was irregular, and I asked one of the other staff members, and she said, "You keep unusual hours." You were curious about my schedule. I was curious about whether anyone would be in that part of the house, Elena said. I didn't want to run into anyone when I was cleaning. That's a reasonable thing. I thought so. Another small silence. I'm going to find him, Luciano said. The sentence came out of nowhere, or seemed to, but Elena understood immediately that it wasn't a change of subject. It was the thing he had been thinking about since she said the letter was addressed to him. Dante, whether he's alive or I need to know what happened. What actually happened? I understand. Your father's documents may not tell us everything. I know that. But they give me something I didn't have before, Luciano said. They give me a direction. He paused. I've been looking in the wrong places for 8 years because I was working with information that Salvatore had access to, information he could shape and redirect. He was working through it as he said it, and Elena could hear the particular quality of a sharp mind processing something painful. Every lead that went nowhere, every dead end, he was there. He would have known when I was getting close. And redirected you, Elena said quietly. Yes. His jaw tightened slightly. Every single time. Elena thought about her father carrying that knowledge. Watching a man he had served spend years searching in circles while the architect of those circles sat at his side. She thought about what that had cost her father. About the letter he could never send and the documents he could never do anything with, and the weight that had grown heavier every year and that he had ultimately passed to her because he had no one else to give it to. He tried, she said. My father. I want you to know that. He was afraid and he made choices I can't entirely defend, but he tried to find a way to fix it. He just couldn't find the door. Luciano was quiet for a moment. What was his name? He said. Your father. Robert Marlowe. I remember him. Luciano said. It came out almost carefully, as if he was checking the statement against his memory before releasing it. Not well. He wasn't someone I interacted with directly, but I remember the name. My father spoke well of him. He spoke well of your father too, Elena said. Something crossed Luciano's face that she didn't know him well enough to fully interpret. Grief, maybe. Or the particular expression of a man who was being told something true about someone he'd lost a long time ago, and who was experiencing the strangeness of grief arriving so much later than the loss. Go get some breakfast, he said. It was softer than most of what he said. I need an hour to make some arrangements. We'll go to your apartment at 9. All right. She stood up. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. Elena. She turned. The man who grabbed you, Luciano said. Derek Powell, 4C at 1182 Callaway Street. She waited. He won't be a problem to you anymore, Luciano said. It was a very simple sentence. He said it without drama or emphasis, the way you might say the weather would be clear tomorrow or the car would be ready at noon. A matter of fact. Elena looked at him for a long moment. I don't want anyone hurt on my account, she said. Nobody is going to be hurt, Luciano said. He's going to receive a visit from some men who will explain to him in very clear language the severity of consequences if he approaches you or your brother again. He paused. He'll understand. People like him usually do when the explanation is thorough enough. Elena said nothing for a moment. Then she said, Thank you. Don't thank me for that either, he said. That's just maintenance. She almost smiled. She didn't, but almost. By 9 o'clock, she was in the back seat of an unmarked black car with Paul driving and Tomas in the passenger seat, moving through the morning traffic toward Callaway Street. She had been given time to shower and change into clothes that Luciano had arranged through some mechanism. She didn't ask about practical clothes, her size nothing extravagant. She had eaten toast and drank 2 cups of coffee and felt the thin, brittle quality of someone operating on no sleep but too much adrenaline to feel it properly yet. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had been scheduled for renovation 3 times in the 7 years she'd been aware of it and hadn't been renovated once. The elevator worked roughly half the time. This morning it did not. So they took the stairs Paul first Tomas behind her in the brisk and efficient way of men who treated stairwells the way other people treated hallways, which was to say, they moved through them without thinking about them and kept their attention elsewhere. Her apartment was undisturbed. She knew it as soon as she opened the door. She had a specific way of leaving things, a way that she had developed not from paranoia, but from the particular attentiveness of a woman who had grown up in a household where nothing was ever quite stable, and who had learned early to notice when things had been moved. Nothing had been moved. She went directly to the bedroom. She pulled the metal fireproof box from under the bed. It was heavier than it looked, which was always slightly surprising, no matter how many times she lifted it. She had bought it 3 years ago from a hardware store with money she couldn't really spare, because the documents inside were the only thing of value her father had left her, and she had understood that even if she couldn't use them, she couldn't lose them. She set it on the bed and opened it with the combination she had never written down anywhere, and she looked at the contents for a moment. The financial transfer record was on top. A single page photocopied from something her father's handwriting in the margins in his small, careful script. Below it, a series of internal organizational documents, the kind that employees of organizations like the Vieri network sometimes kept, because they understood on some level that documentation was the only protection available to people without power. And at the bottom, in an envelope that was worn soft from years of being handled the letter. She took the box and didn't look inside it again. She let Thomas carry it to the car. Back at the estate, Luciano read the documents at his desk, while Elena sat in the chair across from him and watched his face. She had been watching faces her whole life. It was a skill you developed when you were the eldest child of a man who was rarely home, and a mother who had left before you were 10, and when your brother was sick and the adults around you were often scared, and the faces of scared adults were the most important text available to you, because they told you, if you read them correctly, how bad things actually were versus how bad they were saying things were. Luciano's face was extraordinary in its control. He read the financial transfer record without expression. He read the organizational documents, 3 pages of them, without expression. He set them aside in a neat stack. Then he opened the envelope. He took out the letter, which was 2 pages handwritten in her father's deliberate and slightly old-fashioned cursive. He read it slowly. Elena watched his eyes move across the lines, watched his jaw set slightly about a third of the way through the first page. Watched something happen in the area around his eyes, not a change in expression, something underneath expression when he reached the bottom of the first page, and turned to the second. He read the second page. He set the letter down. He sat without speaking for probably 90 seconds. He knew where Dante was, Luciano said finally. Elena nodded. She had been waiting for this. It was the part of the letter she had sat with the longest. The part that had made her put it down and walk away and come back hours later because it was too much to hold all at once. In the last year of his life, she said, he received a communication, he doesn't say from whom, but someone sent him a message indicating that Dante was alive and living outside the country. He doesn't have specifics, he says in the letter that he tried to verify the information, but he was too ill by then to follow up properly. Alive, Luciano said. That's what he was told. He believed it. Luciano pressed 2 fingers against his mouth for a moment. It was the most unguarded gesture she had seen from him. The gesture of a man letting something hit him. 8 years, he said. Yes. If he's alive, then Victor Salvatore arranged to have him removed without killing him, Elena said carefully. Which means there are people who know where he is. Which means the information is findable. Luciano stood up. He walked to the window, and she watched his back and the set of his shoulders, and she thought, not for the first time, that there was a particular kind of man who carried enormous things, not by being unaffected by them, but by finding somehow the physical posture for it, the way you could sometimes tell what a person was holding by the way they stood. Victor has a meeting with me tomorrow morning, Luciano said, still facing the window. A standing weekly briefing. He's been attending it for 12 years. Are you going to cancel it? No. He turned around. His face was resolved in a way that was different from controlled. Control was the absence of expression. What she was looking at was expression that had been processed and converted into decision. "I'm going to hold it." Elena understood immediately. "You're going to watch him. I'm going to give him the opportunity to tell me something's wrong," Luciano said. "I'm going to sit across from him, and I'm going to see what he does with information he doesn't know I have yet." He paused. "Victor is good. He's very good. But nobody is good enough to perform complete innocence in a room where the other person knows the truth. What if he figures out you know? Then we move faster. And the documents, they go somewhere safe that isn't here and isn't your apartment." He looked at her. "There's a lawyer I trust. She holds sensitive materials for a number of my clients. The documents go to her today." Elena nodded. "All right." She watched him move back toward the desk and pick up his phone and begin making arrangements. Brief calls, specific instructions. The kind of coordination that she was beginning to understand was simply his natural language. He didn't waste words. He didn't repeat himself. He said a thing once and expected it to be done, and then moved to the next thing. She thought about her father's letter, about the sentence near the end of the second page that she had read so many times. She saw it when she closed her eyes. "I am sorry for my silence," the letter said. "I know it was wrong. I know what it cost you. I tell myself I was protecting my children, but I know now that protection without courage is not really protection at all. It is only fear by another name." She had forgiven him, not all at once. Slowly, the way you forgave someone whose wrongness and whose humanity were braided so tightly together that to separate them entirely would be to lose something you needed. She had forgiven him, and then she had carried the thing he left her because someone had to. "Elena?" She looked up. Luciano was standing on the other side of the desk holding his phone. "Marco is here," he said. She was out of the chair before he finished the sentence. "Doctor." She found him in the sitting room off the main entrance, standing in the middle of the room with his backpack on and Captain the stuffed dog under one arm, looking around with the enormous round-eyed attention of an 8-year-old who had been promised this was not an emergency and was reserving final judgment. Mrs. Carver was beside him, sitting very upright in an armchair and evaluating the room with the thorough and unimpressed survey of a woman who had been to enough places in 71 years to know that fancy did not equal trustworthy. "Elena," Marco said. He said it the way he always said her name, not like a greeting, but like an arrival. Like the word was a location he had been trying to get to and had finally reached. She crossed the room and went to her knees and put her arms around him, and he leaned into her with his whole body the way he'd done since he was small, his chin on her shoulder and Captain still firmly under his arm, and she held him and felt the thing that was always there when she held him. The specific mixture of love and terror that was the experience of loving something that was fragile and irreplaceable. "Are we in trouble?" he asked into her shoulder. "No," she said. "We're somewhere safe." He pulled back and looked at her with the direct evaluation of a child who had learned early that adults sometimes said they were fine while clearly not being fine. "Your eyes are puffy," he said. "I didn't sleep much." "Why?" "Because I was busy making sure we were okay." "And are we?" She looked at him. At the face she knew better than any face in the world. At the 8-year-old boy who had been born with something wrong in his chest, and who had never in his life treated that fact as an obstacle. "Yes," she said. "We are." He thought about this with the seriousness he applied to important statements. "Okay," he said. "Can I have waffles? Mrs. Carver wouldn't let me have breakfast before we left because she said it would be rude to eat before we arrived somewhere." She heard a sound from the doorway. She looked up. Luciano was standing in the entrance of the sitting room. He was looking at Marco with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not softness exactly. Not sentiment. Something more complicated. Something like recognition, or like a man looking at something he hadn't expected to feel anything about, and discovering he felt something anyway. "The kitchen can make waffles," Luciano said to Marco. Marco looked at him with the absolute composure of a child who had not yet been taught to find Luciano Vieri frightening. "With strawberries?" Marco asked. "With strawberries," Luciano said. Marco looked at Elena. "I like this place," he said simply. Elena felt something happen in her chest that was not uncomplicated. It was relief and fear and grief, and something that might have been, if she let herself name it, the very beginning of something like hope. The particular dangerous kind of hope that arrives when things have been hard for so long that any sign of softening feels almost too fragile to look at directly. She stood up and took Marco's hand. Mrs. Carver rose from the armchair and fell in beside them with the settled practicality of a woman who had determined that this situation, while unusual, was not one requiring alarm. As Elena passed Luciano in the doorway, she felt him look at her. She didn't look back, not directly, but she felt it the particular quality of the attention of a man who was revising something. Some category she'd been filed under, and finding that the new category didn't have a label yet. Down the hall in the kitchen, someone began making waffles. And outside in the city, Victor Salvatore arrived at his office at 9:45, the way he did every morning. Had his coffee, the way he did every morning, reviewed his calendar for the following day, confirmed his standing. Tuesday meeting with Luciano Vieri, and had no idea that the world he had built his safety upon was already quietly, carefully, and with absolute precision beginning to come apart. The waffles were gone by 10:15. Marco ate 2 full plates, which Elena noted with the particular attention of a person who had spent 8 months watching her brother's appetite shrink and expand in direct correlation to how his heart was doing. 2 plates meant a good morning. 2 plates meant whatever was happening in his chest today was not the thing that scared her most. Mrs. Carver had been installed in a guest room 2 doors down from Marco's and had spent the first 20 minutes conducting a thorough inspection of the bathroom fixtures and the closet space, and had ultimately declared the room acceptable, with the resigned approval of a woman who had higher standards than most hotels would ever meet. By 11 o'clock, she and Marco were engaged in a card game at the small table near the window, and the sounds of it. Marco's laugh. Mrs. Carver's dry commentary. The snap of cards moved through the hallway in a way that felt foreign to the estate, which was not a place accustomed to the sounds of a child being simply ordinarily happy. Elena stood in the corridor outside the room and listened for a moment. Then she went back downstairs. Luciano was in his office with Danny Park, who had arrived at 10 with 2 laptops and a folder of printed documents, and the particular focused energy of a young man who had been awake all night doing something he was very good at, and who was experiencing the specific satisfaction of that. He was 29, lean, with the kind of economy of movement that came from spending most of your time in front of screens, not stillness, but efficiency, the sense that no motion in his body was wasted. He looked up when Elena came in. "Ms. Marlowe," he said. He glanced at Luciano, checking whether to continue. Luciano nodded. "Danny has been building a financial map since 3 this morning," Luciano said to Elena. "Show her." Danny turned one of the laptops so she could see the screen. It showed a diagram, nodes and lines connecting them, a web of company names and account numbers and dates. "I started with the transfer record from your father's documents," Danny said. "The one moving funds through the Delaware shell into Vitale's holding company. I traced backward from that and forward from it." He pointed to a cluster of nodes on the left side of the diagram. "Backward, I found 4 similar transactions over a 6-year window. Different amounts, different shell companies, but all tracing back to the same source accounts within our network." He paused. "Forward, I found where the money went, after it hit Vitale's holding company. Some of it moved to offshore accounts I can't trace yet. But some of it, a significant portion, was reinvested into legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, a logistics company in New Jersey. Victor has been building a parallel financial structure inside our organization for at least 6 years, Luciano said. His voice was steady, but Elena had been paying attention long enough now to hear the thing underneath the steadiness. "Using our own money. The logistics company is the most significant piece," Danny said. "On paper, it's a freight company. 3 warehouses, 40 employees, distribution contracts with 6 regional retailers." He clicked to a different screen. "But the actual cash flow doesn't match the business volume. There's significantly more money moving through the company than the freight contracts account for." "He's laundering through it," Elena said. Danny looked at her, not with surprise, with the slight recalibration of someone adjusting their assessment. That's what it looks like, he said. For how long? I can trace it back 4 years clearly, possibly longer with more time. Luciano stood up from behind the desk and walked to the window. It was a thing he did when he was processing something that needed movement, as if the information had a physical quality that required him to shift position under it. He built this whole thing while working for me, Luciano said, sitting across from me every Tuesday morning for 12 years. Yes, Danny said quietly. And I didn't see it. Nobody said anything. It wasn't a question that needed answering. It was the kind of statement a man made when he was accounting to himself for a failure privately in front of witnesses, because he was not the kind of man who hid from his own errors, even when the errors were enormous. Elena understood something in that moment that she filed away without comment. Luciano Vieri was not someone who made excuses. Whatever else he was, and she was still assembling that picture, adding pieces to it the way you assembled a portrait in low light, slowly without certainty. He was not someone who rearranged facts to protect his own image. That was rarer than people knew. What's your confidence level on the financial evidence? Luciano asked, turning back from the window. High for the existence of the parallel structure, Danny said. High for the connection to Vitali, the specific link to Victor personally rather than to someone acting on his behalf. That's where we need the documents. The documents are with my lawyer, Luciano said. I need copies, specifically the financial transfer record and the internal communications. If those reference account numbers or dates that match what I've found in the network, then the chain is complete. You'll have them by noon. Danny nodded and turned back to his screens. He had the focused absence of a person who had already moved on to the next part of the problem, even while his body was still in the room. Elena looked at Luciano. Victor's meeting tomorrow, she said. 8 o'clock. What are you going to tell him? Nothing, Luciano said. I'm going to listen. She thought about that. About a man sitting across from the person who had destroyed his family and saying nothing. About the kind of control that required. Can you do that? She asked. Luciano looked at her. Yes, he said. She believed him, which was its own kind of strange. The Tuesday meeting happened at 8 o'clock exactly. Elena was not in the room. She was in the kitchen on the east side, the old one with a cup of coffee and her phone and the particular quality of waiting that was different from all other waiting, because she couldn't do anything to affect the outcome and knew it. Victor Salvatore arrived at 7:52. She knew because Tomas had been given the job of providing her with basic information about what was happening without providing details that weren't relevant to her safety. He appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:53. He's here, Tomas said. Thank you, Elena said. Tomas disappeared. She looked at her coffee. She had looked up Victor Salvatore the night before on the estate's desktop, using the limited search that the network allowed. There was almost nothing publicly available which was itself information, because men who had operated inside organizations like Luciano's for 15 years either had extensive public presence as a cover, or almost none, and Victor was the second kind. There was a LinkedIn profile sparse listing him as a business consultant. There was a brief mention in a 7-year-old Boston Globe article about a charity dinner. A photograph of a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and the composed, well-dressed bearing of someone who had made an art of looking exactly like what you expected to see. She thought about what it cost to look like what people expected for 15 years. She thought about her father, about the cost of silence, about the different ways a secret could eat a person from the inside. Victor Salvatore's secret was built on calculation and cruelty, and her father's was built on fear, and the difference between those two things mattered, even though the silence they produced looked identical from the outside. 43 minutes later, Tomas appeared again in the doorway. He's gone, he said. How did it go? Elena asked. Tomas, who was not a verbose man, considered this. Mr. Vieri will tell you, he said, which told her nothing and everything. Luciano came to find her at 9:15. He sat down at the old wooden table, the same chair he'd sat in 3 nights ago, and Elena looked at his face and tried to read it, and found that she could read it slightly better than she had before, which was not because his expression had changed, but because she had more context now. More data points, more calibration. He was not alarmed. He was not relieved. He looked like a man who had confirmed something he had hoped was wrong and found it even more wrong than he'd feared. "Tell me," she said. "He asked about Dante," Luciano said. Elena put down her coffee. "At the end of the meeting," Luciano said, 11 minutes before it ended. "We'd gone through the usual material, the legitimate business reports, the quarterly numbers, 3 issues with territory management that needed discussion. All of it completely normal. His affect completely consistent with every other Tuesday for 12 years. He paused, and then at the end he said, "I've heard some rumors about people asking questions regarding Dante. I wanted to make sure you were aware." "He told you someone was asking about Dante," Elena said slowly. "He told me someone was asking questions," Luciano said. "He didn't specify who. He said it casually. The way you mention something you've heard in passing. The way you bring up something minor at the end of a meeting because you want it in the room, but you don't want to make it significant. Because he wanted to see your reaction." "Yes." Luciano's voice was completely flat. "He wanted to know if I'd heard anything, if something had changed in my level of attention to that particular subject." He looked at Elena. He was probing, carefully, the way he's probably been probing for years. "What did you say?" "I said I wasn't aware of anything new and asked where he'd heard it." "And?" "He said he couldn't remember exactly. Said it might have been nothing. Said he'd keep his ear out." Luciano stopped. "He watched my face the entire time he said it." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he knows something has changed?" "I don't know," Luciano said. "He's very good. He's had 15 years of practice at this exact thing." He looked at his hands on the table. "But something made him bring up Dante, today, the same week you showed up in my kitchen." The sentence landed between them. "He knows I came here," Elena said. "He may know you were here before you came here," Luciano said. "If he's been watching you, if he connected your name to your father and has had eyes on you for some period of time, he may know that you've been sitting on information. He may have been patient, waiting to see whether you'd use it." "And now I have," Elena said. "And now you have," Luciano said. The quiet that followed was the kind that required both of them to sit inside it for a moment, because what they were assembling together had weight and gravity and implications that radiated outward in every direction. "The documents are safe," Elena said. "Yes." "And Danny's financial evidence?" "Also safe. Copies in 3 separate locations." Luciano looked at her steadily. "Victor can't stop this by taking the documents. We're past that point. Can he stop it by taking me?" The question came out direct. It was the question she'd been holding since early morning, and she was done holding it. Luciano didn't look away from her. "He's going to try," he said. "I think that's what today was, a test run. He wanted to see if I knew anything, and I don't think I gave him a clear answer either way, which means he's going to escalate to something more direct." He paused. "He needs to know whether you've already told me what you know. If you haven't, taking you gets him the documents and your silence. If you have, taking you is leverage." "Either way, I'm useful to him," Elena said. "Yes." She felt her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear for herself. She thought about Marco upstairs, about the card game, about Captain the stuffed dog with the twice-sewn ear. "Marco can't go back to Calloway Street," she said. "Marco is not going anywhere," Luciano said, and the certainty in his voice was so absolute that it landed in her chest like something structural, something weight-bearing. "Not until this is over. Ren's men are on the building at all times. I added 2 more this morning. Victor doesn't know who they are or what they're for." He looked at her. "You're safe here. Both of you." You can't guarantee that. No, he said. But I can make it as close to a guarantee as this situation allows. He paused. And I'm going to move on Victor before he moves on us. How? I need one more day, Luciano said. Danny is finishing the financial trace, and I need it complete before I act. If I move on Victor without the full picture, and he has something I haven't found yet, some contingency, some protection he's built in, then I've started a fight I can't finish cleanly. And if he moves first, then we adjust. His voice was simple, not dismissive. The voice of someone who had operated in conditions of incomplete information and incomplete safety long enough that it was simply the baseline of his existence. I've been in worse positions than this. Elena looked at him for a long moment. I believe you, she said. Good. I'm not sure I should. Also reasonable, he said. And something crossed his face, not quite amusement, but the precursor to it, the small movement at the edge of something that in another man might have become a smile. Go check on your brother, and stay inside the estate today. I wasn't planning on going anywhere. I didn't think you were. I'm telling you anyway. She stood up. Luciano. It was the first time she had used his name without the formal prefix, and they both registered it in the brief pause that followed. She didn't apologize for it. What happens when this is over? She asked. What happens to Victor? To all of this? He looked at her for a moment. Victor Salvatore is going to answer for what he did, Luciano said. In a court or out of one. I haven't decided which. He paused. The organization is going to change. Some of it has needed to change for years, and I've known that, and I've been slow to act on it because change inside a structure like mine is dangerous, and I've been careful. Too careful, maybe. He looked at the table. A man who prioritizes his own security over what's right is just managing his fear by another name. Someone told me something like that recently. Elena blinked. My father's letter, she said. Yes. He looked up. He was right. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, he would have been glad to hear you say that. She left the room. She went back upstairs, back down the hallway, back to the sound of Marco's laugh and the snap of Mrs. Carver's cards, and she stood in the doorway and looked at her brother and felt the two things that had been braided together in her chest for 2 years, the fear and the determination, begin to slowly, carefully separate. Danny Park delivered his completed financial map at 2:47 in the afternoon. Elena was not in the room for that meeting, but Ren Caruso was, and afterward he came to find her with the particular bearing of a man who had just processed something significant and was not entirely sure how to present it. Mr. Vieri wants you in the study, he said. She went. Luciano was standing. He didn't sit when she came in. He stayed standing, and she understood immediately that whatever Danny had found was something that required him to be on his feet. The logistics company, Luciano said, is not the only external operation. How many are there? 7, Danny said from the side of the room. He was at his laptop again, his posture the same as it had been in the morning forward, focused the posture of someone whose body was simply the apparatus that allowed his mind to work. Over 4 years, Victor has established 7 independent business entities using diverted funds from the organization. The total value of those entities is approximately $48 million. The number sat in the room. Elena felt the scale of it. 48 million, she said. Building his own empire, Luciano said. The words were quiet, almost wondering. Not at the money, but at the construction, at the patience and scope of something built so slowly and carefully inside something else, like a structure built inside another structure, waiting. There's more, Danny said. Luciano looked at him. The logistics company, the one in New Jersey, has contracts. Danny clicked to a new screen. Distribution contracts. I told you they were with 6 regional retailers. That's accurate. But 2 of those retailers are connected through several holding layers to a man named Caruso De Luca. Ren Caruso went completely still. Elena didn't know the name. but the effect it produced on the two men in the room was immediate and physical. A sharpening, a realignment of attention, the way a room changes when someone says something that rearranges every conversation that came before it. "De Luca," Luciano said. "Who is that?" Elena asked. Ren answered, not looking at her, looking at Luciano. "He runs the Philadelphia network, has for the last 10 years. He and Luciano have had an agreement territorial, neutral ground on the central corridor. Victor has been feeding De Luca access to our distribution infrastructure," Luciano said. His voice had taken on a quality she'd not heard before, cold, in a specific way, like the temperature drop that precedes a storm. "Using the logistics company as the bridge, under a neutral business arrangement. Which means De Luca has been inside our territory without us knowing," Ren said. "Which means when Victor moves against me," Luciano said, "De Luca moves with him." The room absorbed this. Elena understood with a clarity that arrived complete and unwelcome exactly how large what she had walked into actually was. She had come to the estate 11 months ago, with a fireproof box and a dying brother and documents she didn't know what to do with. She had understood that the documents were dangerous. She had not understood that the danger was not simply one man and one betrayal. She had not understood that behind Victor Salvatore was a structure funded and patient and positioned waiting for exactly the right moment. "He was going to move against you," she said, "with or without me, with or without the documents. He's been building toward something." "Yes," Luciano said. "The Tuesday meetings, the probing. He's been taking your temperature for weeks. He's been timing it," Luciano said. "He needed to be sure his external structure was ready before he made any move internally, and it is ready, or close enough to ready that he's started checking." He looked at Ren. "He asked about Dante today because he's almost at the point where he doesn't need to be careful anymore. He's almost at the point where he has enough external support that a direct challenge becomes viable." "So we're not days ahead of him," Elena said. "We're hours ahead." Nobody corrected her. The silence confirmed it. "What do you need?" she asked. Both men looked at her. It was Luciano who answered. "I need you to stay exactly where you are," he said, safe and out of his reach. "Because the moment he gets access to you, he knows I've told you." "He'll know you've told me," Luciano said. "And then he knows the clock has run out and he has nothing to lose by acting immediately." He looked at her with a directness that she was learning simply how he looked at things he needed to be certain of. "You staying safe is not the passive part of this. It's essential." Elena held his gaze. She wanted to say something about the fact that she'd been managing her own safety for 2 years without any help and had done a reasonable job of it. She wanted to point out that she had survived things that most of the men in this room would be surprised by. She wanted to register somewhere that being told to stay put did not mean she was a piece to be moved around a board. She said none of this, because she could see that Luciano knew all of it already, and that the instruction was not condescension, but strategy, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was also the thing that looked most like staying still. "All right," she said. Luciano gave Ren a look, and Ren left the room. Then it was just the two of them, Danny quietly working in the corner, the afternoon light moving through the windows. "Danny," Luciano said. "Give us a minute." Danny saved his work and left without a word. "I need to tell you something," Luciano said when they were alone. Elena waited. "The letter your father wrote," he said. "The part about Dante being alive. I've been sitting with it since this morning." He looked at the window, not at her. "My father died believing Dante was dead. He died 4 years ago, and he never knew." He stopped. "And I've spent 8 years operating inside that belief, making decisions inside it, building things inside it." He turned back. "If Dante is alive, then everything I've built since he disappeared was built on a falsehood that Victor planted and maintained." His voice didn't change, but she could hear it, the thing underneath the grief and the rage compressed into perfect flat steadiness. "I need you to understand that what I'm about to do is not just about exposing a betrayal. It's about taking back the truth. whatever that costs. I understand, Elena said. I may not be able to do it quietly, he said. There may be consequences that extend beyond this house and this situation, and I can't guarantee they won't touch you. You told me that when you started, Elena said. I made the choice with that information. You made the choice at 2 a.m. when you were exhausted and afraid, he said. I'm giving you the chance to make it again now. She looked at him for a long moment. My father waited for the right moment for 2 years, she said. He waited for things to be safe enough, and they never were, and he died waiting. She held his gaze. I'm not going to do that. Something moved in Luciano's face. Brief, acknowledging. All right, he said. He picked up his phone. He made a call that lasted 40 seconds. When he hung up, he said, I'm moving on Victor tonight. Tonight I thought you needed another day. I needed the financial map complete, he said. Danny finished it. The documents from your father have been matched against the financial records and the chain is complete. He looked at her. And Victor asked about Dante this morning. I don't think I gave him confidence, which means his timeline just accelerated, and so does mine. Elena nodded. Where will you do it? You do. On neutral ground. There's a restaurant in the North End, a private dining room we've used for sensitive meetings for years. Victor won't find it suspicious. He paused. I'll have Ren present. 2 other men. The financial evidence. Your father's documents. I'm going to sit Victor across from me and I'm going to lay the table and see what he does. And if he tries to run, he won't get far. And DeLuca. DeLuca is a separate problem that begins the moment Victor is dealt with. Tonight is about Victor. He looked at her. Tonight is about getting the truth out of him about Dante. The last sentence was different from the rest. Quieter. Personal in a way that the tactical discussion wasn't. Elena heard it and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make that part of it easier, and she understood by now that he didn't need things made easier. He needed them acknowledged. She acknowledged it with her silence. He acknowledged her acknowledgement with a slight nod. Stay inside, he said. Don't let Marco outside. I'll have Tomas outside your door tonight. You'll call me. He paused, as if the question had presented itself as more complicated than it first appeared. Yes, he said. She went upstairs. She sat in the room with Marco while he watched television, and Mrs. Carver dozed in the armchair, and Captain the stuffed dog was propped against a pillow in a position of great dignity, and she sat with the weight of the evening and tried to believe that things were moving toward resolution and not toward disaster. At 6 o'clock, one of the kitchen staff brought dinner to the room. Marco ate with enthusiasm and described in elaborate detail the card game he had won that afternoon, and the one he had lost, and his theory about why Mrs. Carver was better at cards than she looked. At 7:15, Marco fell asleep sitting up, and Elena guided him to the bed without waking him, and she pulled the blanket over him and stood looking at him for a long moment, in the way that only the people who love someone most urgently do. Cataloging the face, memorizing the particulars of it, the way love and fear share the same gesture. She heard a car leave the estate at 7:30. She heard another at 7:42. By 8 o'clock, the estate was quieter than she had ever experienced it, with a quality of held breath about the silence, as if the building itself understood that something was happening elsewhere and was waiting to know what. Tomas was in the hallway. She saw him when she opened the door for a glass of water. Anything? She asked. Not yet, he said. She went back inside. She sat in the chair nearest the door and looked at Marco sleeping and thought about her father and about a letter written in old-fashioned cursive that had finally reached the person it was meant for, 7 years too late and exactly on time. At 9:47 her phone buzzed. She picked it up. One message from a number she recognized as one of the estate's internal lines. 3 words. We have him. She exhaled. She put the phone down. She looked at Marco, still sleeping, still holding Captain loosely in one small hand. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the small rectangle of window visible above the curtain, where the city's light was doing what city's lights always did, pushing back against the dark relentlessly without rest, because that was the only mode available to it. Her phone buzzed again. A second message. He's talking. She set the phone face down on the table, and she pressed both hands flat against her knees, and she breathed. For the first time in a very long time, she breathed without the weight on her chest arranging itself around the breath, shaping it, restricting it. It wasn't over. She knew that. There was DeLuca, and there was the organization, and there was the question of Dante. The enormous, impossible question of a man who might be alive somewhere in the world who didn't know yet that the brother he'd lost had never stopped looking for him. It wasn't over, but something had broken open that could not be sealed again. The truth that had been buried under 7 years of silence and fear and careful management was out now, moving through the world the way truth moved when it was finally released. Not cleanly, not neatly, not without consequence, but irresistibly. And sitting in the chair beside her sleeping brother in the estate of the most feared man in Boston, Elena Marlowe felt for the first time in 2 years like she had put something down. Not everything. Just enough. Just the part that had been hers alone to carry. Because an hour away in a private dining room in the North End, Victor Salvatore was sitting across from Luciano Vieri with the financial map and the documents, and 14 years of careful lies between them, and he was talking. And whatever he said next was going to change the shape of everything. Victor Salvatore had been in difficult rooms before. He had been in rooms where men pointed weapons at him, and rooms where men offered him things he couldn't afford to refuse, and rooms where the balance of everything he'd built was on the table, and his job was to control the temperature of the conversation well enough that he walked out with what he came in with. He had been doing this for 30 years. The ability to remain composed under pressure was not something he'd developed. It was something he'd been born with, refined, and used as his primary tool in a world where composure was often the difference between winning and losing. But when Luciano Vieri set the financial documents on the table in the private dining room of the Caruso restaurant at 8:14 in the evening and said nothing, just set them down and looked at Victor across the table and waited. Victor? Salvatore felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt the ground shift. "What is this?" Victor said. Not a question. A calculation dressed as a question. What do you know, and how much of it is confirmed? And what does confirmed mean for what happens next? Luciano said nothing. He let the document sit. The financial map was on top. Danny Park had printed it large, 2 pages every node, labeled and dated, and connected by lines so clean and precise that they looked almost like art. Victor looked at it, and Elena would have recognized the stillness that came over his face. The same kind of stillness her father had described in the letter, the absolute absence of visible reaction that very practiced men achieved when they were buying time. "You've been busy," Victor said. "I have," Luciano said. "Who put this together?" "Someone thorough." "It's incomplete," Victor said. He said it without heat, an observation, a test. "Is it?" Luciano said. Victor looked at the second page. His eyes moved across the nodes and lines and names and dates, and Elena's father's documents, which Luciano had placed alongside Danny's map, the photocopied transfer record with the handwritten annotations in Robert Marlowe's small, careful script. Victor's eyes stopped moving. He looked at the handwriting, and in the quarter second before he reassembled his face into its composed arrangement, Ren Caruso, standing against the wall behind Luciano, saw something in Victor Salvatore's eyes that he would describe later to Elena as the look a man gets when he realizes the thing he was most afraid of has been real all along. "Robert Marlowe is dead," Victor said. "His documents aren't," Luciano said. Victor placed his hands flat on the table. It was a deliberate gesture, the kind you made when you were demonstrating that you weren't reaching for anything that you understood the room, and weren't going to do anything that would change the temperature of it in a direction that couldn't be undone. "This is one interpretation of a complicated situation," Victor said. "These records are old. Context matters. The work we did 8 years ago was in response to a real threat that you were not yet fully aware of. Dante was—" "Don't," Luciano said. The single word landed with the quiet completeness of a door closing. Victor stopped. "Don't tell me what Dante was," Luciano said. You've been telling me what Dante was for 8 years. You've been shaping everything I believed about that situation for 8 years, and I have been sitting inside the story you built and making decisions from inside it." He looked at Victor without blinking. "That's over." The room was completely still. "Where is he?" Luciano said. Victor was quiet. "Victor." Luciano's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Where is Dante?" "I don't know. You arranged his removal." "I arranged his—" Victor stopped. Corrected. "I made arrangements that protected the organization. Dante was going to establish a competing network, using information he took from us, using contacts he built on our time and our resources. He was my brother." 3 words, completely flat. The complete absence of performance. Victor was quiet for a moment. "He was a liability," Victor said finally. His voice had shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Ren heard it, and Luciano heard it. The shift of a man who had decided that a door that could no longer be kept closed might as well be walked through. He was going to tear apart everything your father built, everything we built. He was sentimental and impulsive, and he was going to live his own life, Luciano said, at our expense, at his own expense. Luciano's hands were on the table, still. He wanted out. That's not a threat. That's a person making a choice. "In this world, it's both," Victor said. Luciano looked at him for a long moment. "Where is he?" he said again. Victor Salvatore looked at the financial documents, at the map, at 14 years of his own construction laid out on a table in front of the man he had built it inside of. And something happened in his face, not collapse, because Victor Salvatore was not the kind of man who collapsed, but a kind of surrender, deliberate and calculated, the surrender of a man who has identified the specific concession that costs him least. "Portugal," he said. The word dropped into the room and landed with the weight of 8 years. "He's been in Portugal for 7.5 years, Victor said. "Lisbon. He's been running a legitimate business, imports. He doesn't know I know where he is, but I've kept track." He paused. "He left voluntarily. I want to be clear about that. The arrangements I made were to ensure he left and stayed gone. He was not—" He stopped. "He was not harmed." Luciano was very still. "You built a fiction," Luciano said. "You told me he abandoned the family. You shaped every piece of information I had access to so that when I searched in the wrong directions. You kept him gone." "Yes." "For 15 years you sat next to me and you kept him gone." "Yes." "And you built an empire on the side using my money." "Yes." Victor's voice was steady. He had the quality of a man giving a confession not because he was remorseful, but because the mathematics of the situation had shifted, and confession was now the correct tactical move. "I did." Luciano stood up. He stood up from the table and walked away from it and stood with his back to the room for a moment. Ren watched him. The 2 men at the door watched him. Victor watched him. What none of them, including Ren, fully understood was that Luciano was doing something he had not had to do in a very long time. He was choosing, not between options, between versions of himself. Between the version of himself that had existed before this evening, the version built inside Victor's story, and whatever came next. He turned back around. "You're going to give Danny Park access to every account, every entity, every piece of the structure you built," Luciano said. "Everything, tonight." Victor looked at him. "And in exchange, I give you a choice that you don't deserve," Luciano said. "The financial evidence goes to the federal authorities, or it goes to the men from every territory who have been sitting inside a structure you've been quietly compromising for 4 years." He paused. "The first option is uncomfortable. The second one doesn't have an outcome I can predict." Victor Salvatore was quiet for a long moment. He was a man who had spent 30 years in rooms like this one, and he knew exactly what Luciano was telling him, and he knew exactly what his options were, and he possessed beneath everything else the fundamental survivor's instinct to recognize the specific moment when the calculation changed irrevocably. "The first option," Victor said. "Then you'll start tonight," Luciano said. "Ren is going to stay with you." He walked toward the door. "Luciano!" Victor's voice caught him. Luciano stopped, didn't turn. "I built this organization as much as you did," Victor said. 15 years. I was loyal when loyalty mattered. What I built, what I did, it wasn't betrayal. It was... Victor. Luciano's voice was quiet. "Don't." He walked out. He called Elena at 10:23 from the car. She answered on the first ring, and he could hear in the single syllable of her answer, the compressed, controlled quality of it, that she had been sitting with the phone in her hand for hours. "He talked," Luciano said. A pause. "Dante. He's alive." Luciano's voice was steady. "Lisbon. He's been in Lisbon for 7.5 years. The silence that followed was longer than the others. Elena was processing something that she had been carrying as potential for 2 years, the possibility that her father's letter was right, that the information was real, that the most important sentence in that document was not a dying man's hope, but an actual fact. "Are you sure?" she said. Victor confirmed it directly. Another pause. "Luciano?" "Yes." "Are you all right?" The question surprised him, not because it was unexpected from her specifically. He had learned in 4 days that Elena Marlowe asked the questions other people decided not to ask, but because of how it landed. Simple, direct, not rhetorical. An actual inquiry from a person who actually wanted to know. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's honest." "I'm learning it from you," he said. The briefest pause. "Come back," she said. "Marco asked about you before he fell asleep." Luciano, sitting in the back of a car moving through the night streets of Boston, felt something happen in his chest that had no tactical name. He didn't try to name it. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He was there in 17. The estate was quiet when he came in. Tomas was in the hallway on the 3rd floor. He nodded once at Luciano, and Luciano nodded back and walked past him. He stood outside the door of the room where Marco was sleeping for a moment, not knocking, just standing. He went back downstairs. Elena was in the main kitchen. Not the old one. The main one, the modern one that she normally worked in, which was strange to see her in from the other side of the arrangement as the person sitting at the table, rather than the person moving around it. She had tea. She had made enough for 2, without being asked, which he noticed. He sat down. She pushed the second cup toward him. He picked it up and held it and said nothing for a moment. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. All of it. The financial documents, Victor's calculated progression from denial to concession. The specific moment when the word Portugal had entered the room and what it had felt like to hear it. He told her without performance, without the compression he normally applied to information when he shared it with people with the straightforwardness he was finding easier to access around her. The way you found it easier to put something down when someone made clear they could hold the weight of it without flinching. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "When will you go?" "To Lisbon." "Yes." "I need to stabilize things here first," he said. "Victor's structure needs to be fully unraveled. De Luca needs to be addressed." He paused. "But not long. A week, maybe 2. What if Dante doesn't want to come back?" The question landed without cruelty. It was the question of a person who had lived enough to know that reunions were not always restorations. "Then I make sure he's safe wherever he is," Luciano said. "And I tell him what I know, about Victor, about what really happened." He looked at his hands. "He deserves the truth, whatever he does with it." "Yes," Elena said. "He does." They sat quietly for a moment. "Dr. Hayes came this afternoon," Elena said. Her voice shifted to something more careful. "While you were making arrangements, she reviewed Marco's records." Luciano looked at her. "She called Dr. Reeves," Elena said. "They talked for about 40 minutes. She came to find me afterward. What did she say? Elena was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone who has received important information and is choosing how much of their own reaction to let into the delivery of it. She said the procedure he needs is one that Dr. Reeves performs, but that Boston Children's has a wait list of 8 to 12 months for non-emergency cases. She paused. She also said there's a cardiac surgery team in Cleveland, Dr. Marcus Webb at the Cleveland Clinic, who was trained specifically for this type of ventricular repair and has a significantly shorter waiting period. She stopped. She offered to make the referral. She said the results at the Cleveland Clinic for this procedure in children Marco's age are, she said, they were very good. Define very good, Luciano said. 92% full resolution at 5-year follow-up, Elena said. The number came out with the careful steadiness of someone who had been repeating it to themselves since afternoon, wearing it smooth through repetition, getting used to its shape. She said she's seen 3 cases similar to Marco's, and all 3 of the children are doing normally now. Luciano was quiet. That's not a guarantee, Elena said. No, nothing is a guarantee. I've learned not to treat good odds as certainty, because I've been disappointed before, and I can't afford to be. Elena. She stopped. 92% is very good, he said. She looked at her tea. Yes, she said quietly. It is. I'm going to cover the costs, Luciano said. All of it. The Cleveland Clinic, the travel accommodation while he recovers everything. She looked up at him. That's too much. No, he said simply. It isn't. Luciano, you don't owe. I'm not paying a debt, he said. The firmness of it was not unkind. It was the firmness of someone who had identified what they wanted to say and was saying it without the softening that would make it smaller than it was. I am choosing to do something. There's a difference. I don't want you to accept it as settlement of an obligation. I want you to accept it because it's the right thing to do, and I have the ability to do it. Elena looked at him for a long time. He watched the things moving behind her eyes, the independence that wanted to decline the practicality that recognized what acceptance meant for Marco, the exhaustion of 2 years of carrying everything alone, the strangeness of being offered help by someone she had feared and was beginning carefully to understand differently. All right, she said. All right, he said. Something settled between them. The specific quality of a thing that's been decided and no longer needs to be discussed. What happens after? She asked. After DeLuca, after Lisbon, after the organization stabilizes. She looked at him carefully. What does your life look like? It was not the question he had expected. He thought about it. Actually thought about it. Not the tactical answer, not the managerial answer, not the answer that described the next 6 months of operational adjustments. The actual answer. Different, he said. That's not specific. I know. He turned the teacup in his hands. I've been running something for 20 years that I built on a particular set of assumptions. About power, about loyalty, about what security looks like and how you maintain it. He paused. Some of those assumptions were wrong, and I knew they were wrong, and I kept them because changing them felt like instability. And instability in my world has consequences. He looked at her. Victor existed inside the version of me that valued stability over correctness. He operated in the space between what I knew was right and what I was willing to act on. Elena said nothing. She was listening with the quality she had of receiving what people said without rushing to fill the space after it. That changes, Luciano said. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but the version of me that sat across from Victor every Tuesday for 12 years and didn't ask the right questions, that version is done. Good, Elena said. The word was direct. No softening. No performance of encouragement. You mean that, he said. Of course I mean it. She looked at him steadily. The version of you that asked me who did this at 2 a.m. and didn't walk away when the answer was complicated. That's the version that matters. The other one is just fear wearing a different coat. Luciano looked at her. Your father wrote something like that, he said. I know. I grew up watching him try to practice it and fail and try again." She paused. "He got there eventually. It just took longer than it should have. It usually does." "Yes," she said. "It usually does." The kitchen was warm. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds not quiet, but distant enough to be almost peaceful. The clock on the wall read 11:08. "Marco asked about me," Luciano said. "He thinks you're fascinating," Elena said. There was something in her voice carefully contained the faintest trace of warmth. "He said, and I am quoting directly, that you seem like the kind of man who knows everything." "He's 8. He's very perceptive." "What did you tell him?" Elena considered. "I told him that some people take a while to really know, and that it was too early to say." Luciano was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said. "I thought so," she said. The next week moved in the particular way of weeks that carry enormous events compressed together, days that felt both very short and very long hours, that were operationally dense and emotionally exhausting, and that left you at the end of each one, not entirely sure how you'd arrived where you were. Victor spent 3 days with Danny Park, going through every account and entity in the parallel structure he'd built. Danny described the process to Ren as thorough, which from Danny was significant praise. Victor cooperated completely with the particular totality of a man who had calculated that complete cooperation was his best remaining asset. Every shell company, every account, every arrangement with DeLuca's organization documented and sourced and laid out in a map that was significantly larger than Danny's original. Luciano handled DeLuca on the 4th day. He called him directly. No meeting, no neutral ground. He called Caruso DeLuca in Philadelphia at 7 in the morning and told him exactly what he had and what it documented, and what the available options were with the calm specificity of a man who had done his homework and knew it. DeLuca was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Victor told me you'd gone soft." "Victor told you what he needed you to believe," Luciano said. "Was he right?" Another pause. "What are your terms?" DeLuca said. "The arrangement through the logistics company ends immediately. Every cent that moved through DeLuca operations gets documented and returned. The territorial agreement we've held for 10 years stays in place." He paused. "And you tell me everything Victor told you about what he was planning." "That's it?" "That's it." DeLuca was quiet again. Then, "Victor told me you were distracted, that your judgment had been compromised by personal matters, that the organization was softer than it appeared." Another pause. "He said it would be over in a month." "He was wrong on all of it," Luciano said. "Clearly," DeLuca said with the dry tonality of a man who respected competence even when it inconvenienced him. "The terms are acceptable." The call lasted 11 minutes total. Ren, who had been present, said afterward, "That was the fastest territorial resolution I've ever witnessed." "DeLuca is practical," Luciano said. "He got into the arrangement with Victor because it was profitable. There was no loyalty. Men like that respond to better mathematics. And the mathematics are better on your side. Significantly." He said it without satisfaction, just as a fact. On the 5th day, Dr. Victoria Hayes called Elena directly. Elena was in the garden the first time she had been outside since arriving at the estate, stepping out into the cold, bright morning air at Marco's insistence because Marco had decided that staying inside all day was boring, and that the garden was technically inside the gates, and therefore safe, a logic Elena couldn't fully argue with. Marco was chasing something small and fast through the hedgerows, possibly a squirrel, with the absolute conviction of a child who believed that chasing things was sufficient, whether or not you caught them. Mrs. Carver was on a bench watching him with the resigned approval of a woman who had long ago made peace with the fact that 8-year-old boys were essentially governed by forces outside rational jurisdiction. Elena stepped away from them slightly and answered, "Dr. Hayes." "Elena." Victoria's voice was the measured professional warmth of a woman who had learned to deliver important news with appropriate gravity and appropriate hope in careful balance. I spoke with Dr. Webb's office this morning. He reviewed Marco's case summary. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. He has an opening in 3 weeks, Victoria said. The pre-surgical evaluation can be done at the Cleveland Clinic in the week before. He reviewed the imaging and the case notes from Dr. Reeves, and he said, She paused. He said he's operated on cases more complex than Marco's with full resolution. He doesn't anticipate complications. Elena looked at Marco, who had caught up with whatever he was chasing and was standing very still, bent slightly forward, looking at something in the grass with the focused wonder of a person for whom the world was still endlessly surprising. 3 weeks, Elena said. I know that's fast. If you need more time to... No, Elena said. 3 weeks is yes. 3 weeks is good. He'll need to come for the evaluation first. I can arrange transport if... It's been arranged, Elena said. The phrase felt strange in her mouth, not because it was untrue, but because the version of her who said those words was different from the version who had stood in this same cold, bright kind of air a week ago, not knowing how any of it would be arranged or by whom. Someone is handling it. Good, Victoria said. I'll send you the paperwork today. Call me if anything. Dr. Hayes? Elena stopped her. Thank you. I know you didn't have to. I know this was above and beyond. A pause. Then Victoria said with the particular warmth of a person who didn't use it often and meant it completely when she did. He's a good man, Elena. Whatever the rest of it looks like, whatever you decide about all of that. A small pause. He's a good man. Elena said nothing for a moment. I know, she said finally. She hung up. She stood and watched Marco for a minute. Then she walked toward him, and he looked up at her as she came close with the face he made when he was very interested in something and wanted to share the interest. There's a frog, he said in a loud whisper that would have been audible from 20 feet. Don't scare it. Elena looked at the frog. It was sitting in the grass with the supreme unconcern of something that had decided the situation did not require alarm. Marco, she said quietly. Shh. Marco, you're going to get better. He looked up at her from the frog. I know, he said simply, with the confidence of a child who had grown up being told his heart was different, but who had never quite believed that different and broken were the same thing. Elena looked at him. She felt it then. The thing she hadn't allowed herself in 2 years. The thing she had held back the way you held back water with your hands knowing it would get through eventually, waiting for the moment when letting it through wouldn't cost you the ability to function. She felt it arrive through the small gate that 2 years of caution had been holding shut, and it was grief and relief and love, and the particular devastating joy of a thing that has been feared for so long that its resolution doesn't feel like happiness, but like the end of a held breath. Like a body finally remembering how to fully exhale. She didn't cry. She had done her crying, she thought. She just stood in the garden with her brother and the unconcerned frog and breathed the cold, bright air until she felt steady again. Then she went inside to find Luciano. He was in his office. He was always in his office. She had found in the last week that this was simply where he operated from the physical center of gravity of the man. The place where thinking and deciding and managing and planning all happened with the constant low hum of communication around him that was the specific music of someone responsible for something large. She knocked. Come in. She came in. She sat down across from him without waiting to be invited, which she had stopped doing on day 3 and which he had either not noticed or not minded. Victoria called, she said. He looked at her. He had learned, she thought, to read her face the way she'd been reading his carefully, with accumulating calibration, with the particular attention of 2 people who had arrived at a situation without preparation and had been paying close attention ever since. He could see probably that whatever she was carrying into the room was good. Tell me, he said. She told him. Dr. Webb, 3 weeks full resolution, incomparable cases, no anticipated complications. She told him in the same clear and direct way she had learned to tell him things without deflection, without minimizing, without the protective instinct to scale down good news to manage her own expectation. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good." One word. The same word she had used when he told her about DeLuca. She almost smiled. "Good," she agreed. He looked at her. "You called it already. The arrangements," she said. "Yes." "Everything you need." "I know," she said. "I know it's taken care of. I just—" She stopped, found what she was actually trying to say, and said it. "I wanted to tell you myself, before you heard it from Victoria, or from Ren, or from anyone else." She paused. "It felt important for you to hear it from me." Luciano held her gaze for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "You said don't thank you. You said that I don't owe anything," he said. "I said I'm choosing to do something. You said—" He stopped. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I think we've both said things in this room that the other one repeated back at the inconvenient moment." This time she did smile. Small, careful, the smile of a woman who didn't give it away easily, and meant it when she did. "I'm going to Lisbon on Saturday," Luciano said. The smile settled into something more serious. "Are you ready for that?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Completely honest with the question the way he was, she had found with the things that mattered. "No," he said. "I don't think you can be ready for that. I think you go anyway." "Yes," she said. "I know exactly what you mean." They looked at each other across the desk. 8 days ago, she had been a woman he looked at without seeing, moving through his house in a gray uniform, invisible by design and by necessity. 8 days ago, she had been sitting in the old kitchen crying without sound because she had perfected the art of suffering alone. And she didn't know yet that perfecting that art was not the same thing as requiring it. 8 days was not a long time. But Elena Marlowe had learned early that time was not always the relevant variable. That some things took years to move a millimeter, and some things moved the entire world in the space between a single question and the answer. "Who did this to you?" 3 words at 2:17 in the morning. Everything that came after them. "Luciano," she said. "Yes, when you come back from Lisbon." She looked at him steadily. "I'd like to talk about what comes next. For me. For Marco. For what my role here looks like going forward." She paused. "I don't want to assume anything. I don't want to overstep. But I also don't want to go back to being invisible." He looked at her. "You were never invisible," he said. "I was not paying close enough attention." "There's a difference," she said. "Yes," he said. "There is. And I know which one was the failure." He held her gaze. "When I come back from Lisbon, we'll talk about everything. All of it." A pause. "You're not going anywhere, Elena. Neither is Marco. This conversation is just the beginning of a longer one." She nodded once. She stood. She walked toward the door. "Elena," she turned. "I looked up Captain," he said. "The stuffed dog." She blinked. "What?" "Marco mentioned it to Mrs. Carver at breakfast, and I heard him describe the ear." He said it without any particular expression. "There's a restorer in Cambridge. She specializes in beloved objects. She can rebuild the ear properly with the original fabric matched so the repair is invisible." He paused. "I thought he might like to have it done." Elena looked at him. This man, this particular complicated, impossible man. "He'd love that," she said quietly. Luciano nodded. She went to the door and opened it and stood for a moment in the threshold. "Luciano," she said, "the most dangerous thing about you." He waited. "Is that you actually care?" she said. "And you've been hiding it long enough that you've almost convinced yourself it's weakness." She paused. "It isn't." She walked out. Behind her in the office, Luciano Vieri sat alone with that sentence and let it do what it did, which was arrive somewhere in him that had been waiting for something like it for a very long time without knowing what it was waiting for. Outside in the garden, Marco was still watching the frog. The frog had still not decided to be alarmed. And on Saturday, a man who had been lost for 8 years would look up from a life he had built in a city far from home and see his brother walking toward him for the first time since everything fell apart. But that was Saturday. Tonight the estate was warm, and the city pressed its light against the dark, and somewhere upstairs, Captain the stuffed dog waited with patient dignity for an ear that someone had decided was worth fixing. And for the first time in a very long time, Luciano Vieri sat in his office at the end of a day and felt beneath everything, something he didn't immediately have a name for. He sat with it a while. Eventually, he decided it was something like peace. Not the absence of problems, there were still problems, enormous ones, the kind that didn't resolve in a week and wouldn't resolve in a month. But peace underneath them. The kind that comes when the foundation you're standing on is finally at long last real. Saturday came the way consequential days always did, without ceremony, without any particular signal from the morning that the hours ahead of it were going to be different from the hours that had come before. Luciano was awake at 4:45. He didn't fight it. He hadn't expected to sleep well, and he hadn't. And there was a kind of honesty in that. The body knowing before the mind admitted it that something enormous was approaching, and that pretending to rest through it was a waste of both the pretending and the rest. He dressed without turning on the main lights. He went downstairs. He made coffee himself in the old kitchen because the main kitchen staff didn't arrive until 6, and he didn't want to call anyone, and he wanted for these particular early hours to be alone with the thing he was carrying. The flight to Lisbon was at 9. Ren was driving him to Logan at 7. 2 men were coming with him, not for protection, or not only for protection, but because Luciano had learned in 41 years that arriving alone to important things was a choice you made when you were certain of the outcome, and he was not certain of the outcome. He was not certain of anything about what waited in Lisbon except the address that Victor had given him, which Danny had verified through 3 independent sources in 48 hours, and the name of the business, a small import company called Vento Sul, which translated from Portuguese as South Wind, which told Luciano more than a direct statement would have about the state of mind of a man who named his new life after the direction he'd been blown. Away from home. He sat with the coffee and didn't think about what he was going to say. He had tried to plan the conversation twice in the last 4 days, and both times his mind had refused to stay in the planning. Had kept sliding back to the image of his brother's face, younger than it would be now, the face from memory, from before, and what that face had looked like the last time they were in the same room together, which was a dinner at their father's house that had started as a routine family meal and ended with raised voices and a door slamming, and Dante walking out, and Luciano thinking with the arrogance of a man who had always believed there would be more time, that they would resolve it next week. Next week had been 8 years ago. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway in the specific manner of a person who has been awake for a while and has run out of reasons to pretend they're not. She was dressed. Her hair was down, which he had only seen twice before. She looked at him and at the coffee and at the 2 cups on the counter with the accurate perception of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly. She came in and took the 2nd cup without asking. He didn't comment on it. They sat in the familiar silence of the old kitchen, the same table, the same chairs, the same early morning dark outside the windows, and yet nothing in the room was what it had been 8 days ago when they first sat across from each other in it. "What time do you leave?" she asked. 7. She nodded, drank her coffee. "Are you scared?" she asked. He considered being diplomatic about it. Then, yes. "Of what specifically?" He looked at his cup. "That he won't want to come back. That whatever life he's built there is complete enough, that the family he left isn't something he has space for anymore." He paused. "Or that he will want to come back, and there won't be a version of that which works. That we'll stand in a room together and discover that 8 years is more than a distance. That it's a wall." Both of those things are possible, Elena said. I know. And you're going anyway. Yes. Because the truth matters more than the outcome, she said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. She nodded. She looked at her coffee for a moment, and then she said, My father tried to write that letter for 2 years. He drafted it 8 times. I found all the drafts in the same box as the final version. She paused. The first 7 were longer, more explained, more justified. She stopped. The final version was 2 pages, because he finally decided that the only thing you needed to know was the truth. Not his reasons, not his defense, just the truth. He was right, Luciano said. He was always right about the important things, Elena said. That was the difficult part about being his daughter. He could identify the correct thing to do with absolute clarity. Doing it was the part he struggled with. She looked at Luciano. You don't have that problem. He was quiet for a moment. I have a different version of it, he said. I know what to do, and I do it, but I don't always examine whether what I'm doing is actually right or just efficient. He paused. Those are different things. They are, she said. Victor was efficient. For 15 years he was extraordinarily efficient. And he built an empire inside mine and destroyed my family and sat at my table every Tuesday. He looked at the table. Efficiency without ethics is just competent destruction. You should put that on a wall somewhere, Elena said. He looked at her. She was almost smiling. He almost smiled back. I'll be back Thursday, he said. I know. Marco's pre-surgical evaluation in Cleveland is Friday. I know that too. Dr. Hayes is coming with us. She arranged it. Elena looked at him. You didn't have to ask her to do that. I didn't ask her, Luciano said. I told her Marco needed someone he trusted in a clinical setting and that traveling with a new person to a new hospital in another city was going to be stressful for him. She agreed and offered. You told her he needed someone he trusted, Elena said. Not me. Not Mrs. Carver. Dr. Hayes. Dr. Hayes speaks his language, Luciano said. She's been to visit him 3 times this week. He showed her Captain yesterday and explained the ear in detail. He paused. She called him a historian of beloved objects. He's been repeating it to Mrs. Carver approximately every 2 hours. Elena looked at him for a long moment with an expression he had learned to read as the one she wore when she was recalibrating something about him, adjusting some internal picture of him against new information that had arrived without warning. You've been paying attention, she said. I've been practicing, he said. She put her coffee cup down. Come back safely, she said. It was direct and simple the way she said the things that mattered. No performance, just the sentence. Yes, he said. He meant it as more than a logistical commitment. She heard that it was more. The flight was 9 hours, and Luciano spent most of it not sleeping and not reading the briefing materials Ren had prepared and not doing any of the things he might normally use 9 hours in the air to accomplish. He spent it thinking about Dante. Dante Vieri was 37 years old now. He had been 29 when he disappeared. He had been the younger one by 4 years, which meant he had grown up in the specific position of a younger sibling in a family like theirs, aware of the weight of expectation above him, and simultaneously more free of it than Luciano had ever been, because the eldest carried the expectation, and the younger one inherited the exemption from it. Dante had laughed more easily than Luciano, had made friends more easily, had charmed their father's associates without trying to, the way some people charmed rooms simply by being fully present in them, by treating whatever conversation they were in as the most interesting conversation currently happening in the world. He had also pushed against the organization, against the constraints of what their family was, and what it required, against the idea that the life you were born into was the life you were obligated to lead. They had fought about it. More than once. Luciano had been the pragmatist, and Dante had been the idealist, and both of them had believed they were right, and neither of them had been entirely wrong. The last fight had been bad. Luciano had said things he regretted before Dante was out the door. He had intended to say so. Next week, next month. Whenever the space felt right and the pride had settled enough to permit the apology. He had been given 8 years of next week. He was done with next week. The address was a building in the Alfama district, a neighborhood that climbed a hillside in the old part of the city. Narrow streets and yellow trams, and the specific quality of light that belonged to places that had been inhabited for so long that history had become simply the texture of the walls. The import company occupied the ground floor of a 4-story building. There was a small sign, Vento Sul, modest, clean. Luciano told his men to wait. He went in alone. The interior was working space desks, shelving boxes of product samples. The organized, functional reality of a small business that was genuinely operating rather than serving as cover for something else. A woman at the front desk looked up when he entered, young, professionally courteous, and asked in Portuguese if she could help him. Luciano said in English, "I'm looking for Daniel Vieri," because that was the name Dante used here. Daniel. Not quite a disguise, not a false identity in any legal sense, but a small, deliberate step away from the name that connected him to the world he'd left. The woman looked at him for a brief moment. "Who should I say is calling?" "His brother," Luciano said. The pause that followed was 2 seconds, possibly 3. The woman picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it, and then looked back at Luciano and said, "One moment, please," in the tone of someone who had just delivered information that was significant and was waiting to see the consequence of it. The consequence was a door opening at the back of the room. Dante Vieri was 37 years old and looked like himself, which was the first thing Luciano thought, which he understood immediately was not a rational thought, since of course he looked like himself. People didn't stop looking like themselves, but what he meant and what arrived in his chest, with the force of something that had been held under pressure for 8 years, was that Dante looked like Dante. The same face, older, the same way of standing slightly forward, weight on the front foot. The posture of a person who moved toward things rather than away from them, with a quality in his expression that was impossible to fully describe, except as the particular stillness of a man looking at something he thought he was prepared for and discovering he was not. They stood and looked at each other across the room. The woman at the front desk was very carefully interested in her computer screen. "Luca," Dante said. Nobody had called him that in 8 years. The name hit him somewhere behind the sternum. "Yeah," Luciano said. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then Dante crossed the room and Luciano met him halfway, and they stood close in the way of people who shared too much history to manage the transition from estrangement to proximity gracefully, an embrace that was brief and tightly held and released before either of them had to deal with what it meant, the way men of their generation manage the enormous things. "Come to the back," Dante said. Luciano followed him. The office at the back of the building was small and practical and reflected its occupant in the way that spaces long inhabited by a single person always did. The shelves with books and binders and 2 photographs that Luciano recognized from before and couldn't look at directly yet. The desk with 3 monitors and a worn chair. A coffee maker that looked like it was used approximately 16 times a day. They sat on opposite sides of the desk, which gave both of them the structure of a surface between them, which felt honest rather than formal. They needed some architecture. The raw, open space of simply facing each other without anything between them could come later. "How did you find me?" Dante said. It wasn't accusatory. It was the question of a man who had been careful and wanted to understand where the care had failed. "Victor told me," Luciano said. Dante went still. "Victor," he said. "Yes." "Victor told you." Dante looked at him with the expression of a man processing something that was reconfiguring other things as it arrived. "Why would Victor?" "Because I asked him directly in a room where refusing to answer was not a viable option," Luciano said. "And because I had documentation he couldn't dispute, and a financial trace that established 8 years of activity that he couldn't explain in any other context." Dante was quiet. "You know," Luciano said, It wasn't a question. Dante looked at the desk, then back up. I suspected, he said. I suspected for a long time. Not immediately. Immediately, I just believed I'd gotten out, and that someone with organizational interest had tracked me and let me go, because it was cleaner than the alternative. It took about 2 years before the shape of it became clear enough that I understood Victor had engineered the whole thing. Why didn't you contact me? The question was direct. Luciano had decided on the flight that he was going to ask the things he needed to know and not manage them into easier versions of themselves. Dante looked at him for a long moment. Because I didn't know if you knew, Dante said. I didn't know whether Victor was operating independently or whether... He stopped. I didn't know, Luca. I spent 2 years trying to figure out whether my brother ordered Victor to get rid of me or whether Victor did it without you. He paused. That's what he wanted, I think. The ambiguity. So that I couldn't come back even if I wanted to because I didn't know what I was coming back to. The room absorbed this. Luciano felt the specific cold of it, not surprise, because he had constructed the possibility in his mind, before this conversation, had made himself sit with it as a version of events that had to be considered. But feeling it confirmed, hearing Dante say it in his own voice across a desk in Lisbon, was different from holding it as a theoretical. I didn't know, Luciano said. I know that now. You should have known it then. Yes, Dante said. I should have. A pause. But we were in a bad place when I left. The things we said. I was wrong, Luciano said. Dante looked at him. About what you wanted. About what it meant for you to want out. Luciano held his brother's gaze. You weren't abandoning the family. You were trying to find a way to live that wasn't defined by what our father built. I told you that was selfish, and I was wrong, and I should have said so before you walked out the door, and I didn't. The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. Victor used that, Dante said quietly. Whatever he told your man Marlowe about my intentions, he used our fight. He made it sound like I was going to use what I knew against the organization, like I was positioning against you. He stopped. I wasn't. I was angry and I was done, but I wasn't going to... I know, Luciano said. I know that now, and I should have known it then. He paused. Robert Marlowe's daughter brought me the documents. She'd had them for 2 years, and she didn't know what to do with them, and she eventually decided to trust me with them. He looked at his hands. A 26-year-old woman carrying her dead father's burden walked into my house and handed me the truth because she was tired of carrying it alone. He looked back at Dante. She was braver than I was. For 2 years, she was braver than I was. Who is she? Dante asked. Her name is Elena, Luciano said. And something in the way he said it was different from how he said other names, and Dante, who had grown up reading his brother, heard it immediately and said nothing about it for the moment, filed it, held it. Is she all right? Dante asked instead. She's all right, Luciano said. Her brother is having surgery next week, heart condition. He's going to be fine. And she works for you. She works with me, Luciano said. The correction arrived without forethought instinctively. There's a difference I'm still working out the implications of. Dante looked at his brother for a moment. For the first time since Luciano had walked through the door, something moved in Dante's face that was lighter than the weight of everything that had preceded it. Not a full smile, but the shape of one arriving from somewhere distant. You haven't changed as much as I expected, Dante said. In what way? You still say more than you intend to, Dante said. And then you realize you've said it and you don't take it back because taking it back would be dishonest, and you'd rather deal with having said the true thing than manage the consequences of the comfortable lie. He paused. You've always been like that. It used to drive me crazy. Does it still? Dante looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. Right now it's the most reassuring thing in this room. Luciano sat with that. Are you coming home? He said. Dante was quiet. Not the quiet of a man who didn't know. The quiet of a man who knew and was deciding whether to say it. I built something here, Dante said finally. Vento Sul is real. It's been real for 6 years. There are 12 people who work here who depend on it. He paused. It's not Boston. It's not what I grew up in. But it's mine in a way that nothing before it ever was. He looked at Luciano. I can't walk away from it. I'm not asking you to walk away from it. Dante looked at him. I'm asking you to come home, Luciano said. Not to the organization, not to what we were. I'm asking you whether we can find a way to be brothers again across whatever distance that involves. He paused. Vento Sul can operate from Lisbon. It can expand if you want to expand it. What you built here doesn't have to end for us to fix what was broken. Dante was very still. The organization, he said. What you run. What our father built. Is it changing? Luciano said. Not overnight, not cleanly, but changing because it has to, and because I've understood something in the last 2 weeks about the cost of not changing. He looked at his brother. Victor operated in the space between what I knew was right and what I was willing to act on. I'm closing that space. That's a large project. Yes. You'll need help. Yes. They looked at each other. I'm not coming back to work for you, Dante said. I didn't ask you to. I'm not coming back to be under what we were before. I'm not offering what we were before. Then what are you offering? Luciano thought about Elena in the old kitchen at 2:17 in the morning and what had been different about that moment from every other moment in the years preceding it. He thought about what she had said about their father, about the man who could always see the right thing and always struggled to do it. He thought about Marco and Captain the stuffed dog and the ear that someone had decided was worth fixing. I'm offering an honest conversation, Luciano said. One that should have happened 8 years ago. One that we're having now because we're both here, and the truth is finally in the room. He paused. Everything after that, we work out as we go. Dante Vieri looked at his brother for a long time. I have a dinner reservation tonight, he said. For one. Cancel it, Luciano said. A pause. There's a restaurant 2 streets from here, Dante said. I've been going there for 6 years. The owner knows me by name, and she makes a bacalhau that would make you reconsider everything you think you know about food. All right, Luciano said. You're buying, Dante said, since you showed up without calling. Fair, Luciano said, and Dante Vieri smiled the full version of it. The one that was too big for the careful management, the last 2 hours, had required the one that was essentially identical to the smile Luciano remembered from before everything broke apart. And Luciano felt something in his chest that was grief and relief and love and the particular devastating mercy of being given something back that you had accepted as gone. He didn't say any of this. He didn't need to. Dante already knew. They talked for 6 hours. They ate and they talked, and they ordered coffee and talked more, and then walked, because neither of them could sit still through everything that needed to be covered. And they walked the narrow, hilly streets of the city that Dante had been living in while Luciano had been searching in the wrong directions. And they talked about their father, and about the organization, and about Victor, and about the specific moments in the years since Dante left, where each of them had been closest to reaching for the phone and had pulled back. They talked about what they had each believed about the other during the silence. That conversation was the hardest one. But they had it, directly without managing the edges of it into softness, because they were both men who had learned that the unmanaged truth, however painful, was less destructive than the comfortable version of it. Dante had believed for the first year that Luciano had ordered it, had sat in apartments in 3 cities, London first, then Barcelona, then Lisbon, and had grieved not just the loss of his family, but the version of events in which his own brother had decided he was a liability. He had built Vento Sul on the foundation of that grief, had made something real from the material of it. Luciano listened to this and didn't defend himself against the belief because it hadn't been an unreasonable belief, and the work of repairing it was not rebuttal but time and presence and demonstrated truth. The woman, Dante said near the end of the evening when they had covered the hard things and were moving into something that felt cautiously like the territory of what came next. Elena. Luciano looked at him. Tell me about her, Dante said. So Luciano told him. Not everything, some of it was Elena's to tell, and he understood that instinctively, but enough. The kitchen at 217, the bruise, the fireproof box, the way she had sat across from him at the wooden table and calculated whether she could trust him and decided she could, and then said so directly without softening or performance. The way she had looked at Marco, sleeping with her whole body arranged around the fact of loving him. The way she had walked out of his office and said that the most dangerous thing about him was that he actually cared and that he'd been hiding it so long he'd almost convinced himself it was weakness. Dante listened. When Luciano finished, Dante was quiet for a moment. She's right, Dante said. Yes, Luciano said. Are you going to do something about it? I'm working on it, Luciano said, which was not the same as yes, but was far from no. Dante nodded. You've always been slow with the things that matter to you, he said. You think speed is for decisions you don't care about. That's not wrong. No, Dante agreed. But don't be so slow that the window closes. Those tend not to reopen. Luciano looked at his brother. Since when are you giving relationship advice? Since I spent 8 years alone in a city that wasn't mine, Dante said simply, and learned what it costs. The sentence landed without drama, just truth. The specific truth of a man who had paid for a lesson in the currency of years and wasn't pretending otherwise. Luciano said nothing. He heard it. He flew back to Boston on Wednesday. He called Elena from the car coming in from Logan. She answered on the first ring the same way she had answered every time he'd called from Lisbon, which had been once each day brief and informational, and also increasingly not only that. Well, she said. He's alive, Luciano said. He's well. He's built something real there. Is he coming back? Not the way things were, but yes. He paused. We're figuring out what back means. It's a conversation that's going to take longer than a week. The important ones always do, Elena said. He wants to meet you, Luciano said. A pause. Me. He said anyone who walked into my house with a fireproof box and told me the truth about my own organization is someone he'd like to shake hands with. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He sounds like someone worth knowing. He is, Luciano said. He always was. There was a brief warm quality to the silence between them. The kind that accumulates when two people have been in daily contact through an emotionally significant week and have arrived at a degree of ease with each other that neither of them has formally acknowledged. Marco's pre-surgical evaluation is Friday, Elena said. I know, I'll be there. A pause. You don't have to. Elena, he said. She stopped. I want to be there, he said. That's different from having to. All right, she said. Her voice was the careful one she used when something had landed more than she expected, and she was deciding what to do with it. All right. He was back at the estate by 7 in the evening. Marco was in the front hall when he came through the door wearing pajamas at an hour that suggested he had been winning an argument with Mrs. Carver about bedtime holding Captain in one arm, and looking at Luciano with the round-eyed attention of a child who had decided several days ago that this particular adult was someone worth assessing seriously. You came back, Marco said. I said I would. People say things, Marco said, with the philosophical resignation of an 8-year-old who had already developed a nuanced relationship with the gap between promises and reality. I know, Luciano said, but I meant it. Marco considered this evaluation. Did you bring anything? He asked. Marco, Elena said from the stairs in the tone of a person managing the gap between what a child wanted to ask and what was socially appropriate. It's a fair question, Luciano said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small flat package wrapped in plain paper. I found this in a shop near the waterfront in Lisbon. The man who ran it said it was a Portuguese navigator's compass. 19th century. He said it was used on trading ships. Marco took it and unwrapped it with the specific focus of a person for whom the process of opening something was as important as the thing inside. The compass was small and brass and worn in the way that old things were worn with the warmth of decades of handling rather than the cold of neglect. Marco turned it over in his hands. "It's real?" he asked. "It's real. Like someone actually used this on a ship." That's what the man said. Marco looked at the compass for a long moment. Then he looked at Luciano with the expression of a child who has decided that an adult has met a standard that the adult did not know was being applied. "Captain wants you to know he approves," Marco said seriously. Elena made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and was not quite a cough, and was definitely something she was managing in order to maintain an appropriate expression. "I appreciate that," Luciano said also seriously. Mrs. Carver appeared from the direction of the kitchen and assessed the scene with the experienced eye of a woman who had been reading rooms for 71 years. "Bed," she said to Marco. Marco went without apparent argument, still holding the compass, which suggested he had decided that compliance tonight was the correct strategy for ensuring future negotiations went his way. The front hall was quiet. Elena came down the last few stairs and stood in the space of it and looked at Luciano with the direct, clear-eyed attention that was simply how she looked at things. "You look tired," she said. "I'm all right." "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked at him for another moment. "Come into the kitchen," she said. "I made food. Actual food, not staff food. Mrs. Carver taught me something with chicken that I'm fairly certain is going to change my life." He followed her. They sat at the old wooden table with the food she had made and the ease that had been building between them over the 10 days since she had first sat across from him in this room. And they ate, and they talked about Dante and about Lisbon and about what Luciano had understood during the 6 hours of walking and talking with his brother that he hadn't understood before he left. He said something, Luciano told her, about building something from grief, about how you can make a real thing from loss if you let the loss be what it actually is instead of what you wish it had been. He paused. He said he spent the first year being angry, the second year being sad, and then somewhere in the third year, he picked up the work and the work gave him somewhere to put all of it. "He's smart," Elena said. "He always was." Luciano looked at the table. "He said I was slow with the things that matter to me." Elena looked at him. "Are you?" she asked. He looked back at her. "Historically," he said. The word landed with its full meaning. She heard the full meaning. "I've been thinking," Elena said carefully, "about what you said, about talking when you came back, about what comes next." "Yes, I've been offered a position," she said. "Dr. Hayes mentioned it to me before you left, and I've been sitting with it." She paused. "There's a foundation in Boston Family Medical Support, specifically covering families dealing with pediatric conditions who don't have the resources to navigate the system. They're looking for a director of family services." She looked at him. "Someone who understands the situation from the inside, not from an administrative perspective. You would be extraordinary at it," Luciano said. No hesitation, no qualification. She looked at him, and the directness of it, the absolute unhedged conviction of it, did something to her expression that she didn't fully manage. "I haven't said yes yet," she said. "What's stopping you?" "I don't know what my situation is here," she said. She said it directly, which he had come to understand was simply who she was. She named things. She didn't circle them and hope someone would come close enough to notice. "I don't know whether my role in your life, what this is. I don't know how to plan the next thing without understanding that." Luciano set down his fork. He looked at her across the table with the clarity of a man who had spent a week being told by various people and experiences that the cost of slowness was borne by everyone who was waiting and who had decided on a plane somewhere over the Atlantic that the correct response to that understanding was not further deliberation. "What this is," he said, is the most honest thing that's happened in my life in longer than I want to admit. He paused. And I am aware that we have known each other for 10 days, and that 10 days is not a long time, and that both of us have reasons to be careful. He looked at her. I also know that careful can be its own kind of cowardice when you're using it as a reason not to say a true thing. Elena was very still. What's the true thing? She said. That I want you to take the foundation position, he said. Because you'll do something real with it, and because it's the right fit for who you are, and because I want to be in a position to watch you build it. He held her gaze. That I want Marco to have the surgery and recover, and grow up in an environment where he's not carrying more than he should carry at 8 years old. He paused. And that whatever the shape of this is, whatever we are, and whatever we're building, I'd like to keep building it. Elena looked at him for a long moment. 10 days ago, she had been hiding a bruise in a kitchen at 2:17 in the morning. 10 days ago, she had been measuring out her strength in careful portions because there was nobody else to maintain the supply. 10 days ago, the idea of sitting across from Luciano Vieri in this kitchen and being asked what she wanted would have been so far outside the available range of her circumstances that it wouldn't have presented itself even as a fantasy. I want that too, she said, quietly, clearly, without the walls. Luciano nodded once, the kind of nod that meant something had been decided that didn't need to be said again. The surgery happened 3 weeks later. Dr. Marcus Webb at the Cleveland Clinic was everything Victoria Hayes had described, precise, calm, communicative in the way the best surgeons were communicative, which was to say, he explained things in the register you needed rather than the register that demonstrated his expertise. The procedure took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Luciano sat in the waiting room with Elena for all 4 hours and 11 minutes. He did not look at his phone. He did not take calls. He sat beside her, and when she needed to be quiet, he was quiet, and when she needed to talk, he listened, and when the silence became the particular quality of silence that meant she was somewhere inside herself managing something too heavy to hold still. He put his hand over hers on the arm of the chair between them and said nothing, because nothing was the correct thing. She didn't pull her hand back. When Dr. Webb came out and said the surgery was complete and successful, and that Marco was in recovery and would be awake in about an hour, Elena sat with her hand still under Luciano's and breathed in the specific way of a person whose body is releasing something. It has been holding for 8 months, and she didn't cry because she didn't have the crying in her right. Now she just breathed, and Luciano sat with her and let her breathe. Mrs. Carver, who was on the other side of the room, produced a handkerchief from her purse with the efficiency of a woman who had prepared for this outcome, and said, well, with great satisfaction, and that was the correct thing to say, and everybody in the room felt it. Marco woke up asking for Captain. Captain was there. He had traveled to Cleveland in Marco's backpack in the specific position of authority that Marco assigned him for important occasions, which was head out with the repaired ear visible. Because the restorer in Cambridge had done her work, and the ear was fixed invisibly with fabric that matched the original so precisely, that Marco had turned the dog over in his hands for a full minute before saying, with the tone of a small judge delivering a verdict, that the repair was acceptable. When he woke from surgery and found Captain present, and the ear intact, and Elena on one side of the bed, and Mrs. Carver on the other, and Luciano standing at the foot of it, with his arms folded, and his expression arranged in the particular way of someone who was feeling a great deal, and managing the presentation of it with mixed success. Marco looked around at all of them and said, "Did it work?" "It worked," Elena said. He thought about this. "Can I have waffles?" he asked. Elena made a sound. Luciano at the foot of the bed looked at the ceiling briefly, and then looked back at Marco with the expression of a man who had been told something in a kitchen 10 days and a lifetime ago, and who was now in a hospital room in Cleveland, discovering that the world had rearranged itself around a completely different set of facts than the ones he'd started with, and that the rearrangement was extraordinary, and that the 8-year-old in the bed demanding waffles in a post-surgical ward was somehow central to the new architecture. When the doctors say it's okay, he said. Marco looked at him. Today? We'll ask. That's a yes, Marco told Mrs. Carver. That is not a yes, Luciano said. It's not a no, Marco said. Mrs. Carver's expression indicated that she found this exchange satisfying in ways she was too dignified to express directly. Elena reached across and held Marco's hand, and Marco held hers back with the grip of a child who had just come back from somewhere difficult and wanted to make sure the person at the other end of the hand was real, and she looked at him with the specific love of a person who has been terrified and is no longer terrified, and is in the particular grace of that change. She looked up and found Luciano watching her. She held his gaze. He held it back. 6 months later, the Marlowe Family Foundation opened its first intake office in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. The name had been Elena's choice, and Luciano had said nothing about it because it was correct. Because Robert Marlowe had spent years trying to find the door to the right thing and had died before he found it, and his daughter had found it for him, and that deserved to be somewhere in the name. On the morning of the opening, Elena stood in the front office and looked at the room she had spent 4 months building the staff. She had assembled the intake process she had designed from her own experience of navigating impossible systems without adequate support. The list of 12 families already on the intake roster who were where she had been a year ago, and who were going to find a different experience than the one she'd had. Luciano arrived at 9:15. He was not late, which she had not expected him to be, because she had learned in 6 months that when he said he would be somewhere, he was there, which was a simple thing that turned out not to be simple at all. He looked at the room. "You built this," he said. "We built it," she said. He looked at her. "You built this," he said again. Not correcting, acknowledging. Understanding the difference between support and authorship, and assigning authorship correctly. She let him be right about that. "Marco's with Dante today," she said, because Dante had come to Boston 3 weeks after Luciano's return from Lisbon for what was supposed to be a 10-day visit, and had extended twice already, Vento Sul operating from a Boston satellite office that had been established with a speed that suggested Dante had been readier to come home than either of them had admitted. Marco had decided within 48 hours of meeting Dante that Dante was the most interesting adult in his world. Dante had responded to this with the enthusiasm of a man who had been alone for 8 years and was discovering what it felt like to have a child decide you were worth knowing. They had been nearly inseparable for 3 weeks. "He's teaching him to navigate by compass," Luciano said. "They've been using the one from Lisbon." Elena looked at him. "Of course they have," she said. They stood in the office she had built and looked at the work ahead of them. And Luciano was beside her, not in front of her, and not behind her, which was where he had learned over 6 months that she needed him to be, and which was where he had learned over 6 months that he most naturally fit. "Are you ready?" he said. She looked at the intake roster. 12 families, 12 sets of circumstances as impossible as hers had been. 12 situations where someone was carrying everything alone and didn't know yet that there was another option. "Yes," she said. She meant it completely. That evening, Luciano found her in the old kitchen. The same sink, the same table, the same clock on the wall that he had watched read 2:17 on the night everything changed. She was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, not crying, not hiding, just standing in the room the way you stood in a room that had meaning, with the specific awareness of what the space had once contained and what it contained now. He came in and sat down at the old wooden table, and she turned and looked at him with the expression she had now, the one that had been built layer by layer over 6 months of true things said directly and distances closed honestly, and every single time he had been where he said he would be. "You know," she said, "a year ago, I thought you were the most dangerous person in this house." Luciano looked at her. And now, she smiled, the full version of it. The one she didn't give away lightly and meant completely when she did. "Now, I think the most dangerous thing about you," she said, "is that you actually care, and you stopped hiding it." Luciano laughed, A real laugh. Not managed, not compressed, not the performance of ease. The actual sound of a man in the specific place in his life where the thing he'd been looking for had been found, and he knew it. It was by every account a sound nobody in his world had ever heard before. But Elena had heard it. Elena had been hearing it for 6 months. And in the old servant kitchen of the Blackwood estate, with the city pressing its light against the windows, and Marco somewhere in the house, explaining compass navigation to a man who had traveled 7.5 years to come home. The Mafia boss of Boston's underground empire sat at a wooden table and laughed, and the woman who had once cleaned his floors and cried without making noise stood across from him and felt in her chest the complete and unambiguous weight of a life that had finally become her own. The question had been 3 words. Who did this to you? And everything that followed had been the answer, not the surface answer, not the name of the man with the bruising grip, but the real answer, the one that took months to fully arrive. It had been this, all of it. The fireproof box, and the letter, and the waffles, and the compass, and the ear that someone decided was worth fixing, and the foundation with 12 families on its first roster, and the brother who came home, and the man who laughed in a kitchen at the end of a year that had remade everything. The secret Elena Marlowe had carried alone was never just about a hidden family connection, or a buried betrayal, or the documents in her father's careful cursive. It was about the truth that even the most guarded people in the right moment with the right question could be reached. And the man who had asked the question cold and feared and alone in ways he had stopped noticing had reached her. And she had reached back. And that, in the end, was the only thing that had ever needed to happen.